A chilling whisper drifts through the balmy Jerusalem night. You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed? Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, freezes, his vacation shattered by a sinister plot. In the shadow of Petra's ancient cliffs, a tyrant's death sparks a web of secrets, betrayal, and vengeance. Who spoke those deadly words? Why does the Boynton family cower under their matriarch's gaze? And can Poirot unravel the truth before the desert swallows it? Forever dive into appointment with death, where every glance hides a motive and every step echoes with suspense. Chapter 1. Whispers in Jerusalem. The evening air in Jerusalem hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and dust, a curious blend of the sacred and the ancient that seemed to cling to the very stones of the city. Hercule Poirot sat on the balcony of the King Solomon Hotel, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly over the polished handle of his cane, his eyes half closed against the golden glow of the setting sun. To an onlooker he might have appeared as a man lost in idle contemplation, a tourist savoring the romance of the Holy Land. But Poirot's mind, sharp as the edge of a Damascus blade, was never truly at rest. His neatly trimmed mustache twitched slightly, betraying the alertness beneath his placid exterior. He had come to Jerusalem for a respite, a brief escape from the demands of his reputation as the world's greatest detective. Yet, as he had learned time and again, mystery had a way of finding him, even in the shadow of ancient walls. The balcony overlooked a courtyard where date palms swayed gently, their fronds casting long, wavering shadows across the tiled floor. Below, the hum of conversation from the hotel's dining room drifted upward, mingling with the clink of glasses and the soft laughter of travelers. Poirot sipped his tisane, a fragrant herbal infusion that soothed his nerves, and allowed his gaze to wander over the scene. That King Solomon was a haven for the eclectic British aristocrats on their grand tours, American missionaries with earnest eyes, and local merchants whose quick smiles masked sharper intentions. It was a microcosm of the world, and Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, found it a fascinating stage. His attention was drawn to a group seated at a table near the courtyard's edge, their voices distinct yet subdued, as if they wished to remain unnoticed. The Boynton family, as he had learned from the hotel register, was an American clan, their presence marked by an odd air of constraint. At the center sat Mrs. Boynton, a woman whose sheer physical presence seemed to dominate the group like a boulder in a stream. She was corpulent, her face a mask of sallow flesh framed by iron-gray hair, her eyes small and glittering like those of a serpent. Her stepchildren, 3 young adults and a girl barely out of her teens, sat around her, their postures rigid, their faces pale. They spoke little, and when they did, it was with a deference that bordered on fear. Poirot's curiosity stirred. There was something unnatural in their dynamic, something that whispered of secrets and suppressed desires. He leaned back in his wicker chair, adjusting his straw hat to shield his eyes from the fading light. The Boyntons were not alone in the courtyard. A young woman, her dark hair swept back in a practical yet elegant style, sat at a nearby table, her medical bag resting beside her. She was reading a book, but her eyes flicked occasionally toward the Boyntons, her expression a mix of curiosity and disapproval. Poirot noted her keen intelligence, the way her fingers tapped thoughtfully against the book's cover. A doctor, perhaps, or a nurse. Her presence added another layer to the scene, a counterpoint to the Boyntons' oppressive silence. It was then that the words reached him, carried on the warm evening breeze like a venomous dart. You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed? The voice was low, urgent, and unmistakably male, coming from an open window just above the courtyard. Poirot's head tilted imperceptibly, his senses sharpening. The words were not meant for him, yet they struck with the precision of a well-aimed arrow. He set down his tisane, his fingers lingering on the delicate handle, and listened intently. The voice continued, softer now, almost a whisper. There's no other way. She never let us go. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The window belonged to one of the Boynton family's rooms, he was certain. The hotel's layout was clear in his mind, a mental map he had constructed upon arrival. The speaker could be one of Mrs. Boynton's sons, Lennox, the eldest, with his hollow cheeks and haunted eyes, or Raymond, the younger, whose nervous energy seemed barely contained. Or perhaps it was another, someone outside the family, drawn into their orbit. The words hung in the air, heavy with intent, and Poirot felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. He rose, smoothing his immaculate white suit, and moved to the balcony's edge, his steps silent on the tiled floor. Below, Mrs. Boynton's gaze swept over her family, her lips curling in what might have been a smile or a sneer. Her eldest son, Lennox, sat slumped, his hands clasped tightly as if to anchor himself. Raymond beside him stared at the table, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm. Carol, the elder daughter, kept her eyes downcast, her hands folded in her lap, while Ginevra, the youngest, fidgeted with a strand of her red-gold hair, her expression distant and dreamy. They were a family bound not by love, but by something darker, something Poirot could not yet name. The young woman with the medical bag looked up, catching Poirot's eye for a fleeting moment. Her expression was guarded, but there was a spark of recognition, as if she, too, sensed the undercurrent of tension. Poirot inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, before turning his attention back to the Boyntons. The words from the window echoed in his mind. Murder, he knew, was never spoken of lightly, even in jest. The speaker's tone had carried a weight of desperation, a resolve that chilled him despite the warmth of the evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. Casting the courtyard into twilight, Poirot made a decision. He would observe the Boyntons discreetly, as was his way. He would listen, watch, and piece together the fragments of their lives until the truth revealed itself. For now, he returned to his chair, his tisane now cold, and resumed his pose of idle contemplation. But his mind was alight, the little grey cells already at work. Sifting through the possibilities, the evening deepened, and the courtyard began to empty as guests retired to their rooms or sought the city's nightlife. The Boyntons remained, their table an island of silence amidst the fading chatter. Mrs. Boynton rose at last, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she relished the power of making others wait. Her family followed, their steps mechanical, their faces blank. Poirot watched them disappear into the hotel, their shadows merging with the darkness. He was about to retire himself when a figure approached his tabbouleh man, tall and lean, with a scholarly air and a faint French accent. "Monsieur Poirot?" the man inquired, his voice polite but tinged with curiosity. Poirot nodded, gesturing to the empty chair. The man introduced himself as Dr. Theodore Gerard, a psychiatrist studying the effects of control and manipulation. He had noticed pure interest in the Boyntons and, sensing a kindred spirit, offered a cautious observation. "That family," he said, his eyes flicking toward the now empty table, "is a study in oppression. The mother, she is a tyrant." Nan Poirot's mustache twitched. "You are observant, doctor. Tell me, what do you make of them?" Gerard hesitated, then spoke of Mrs. Boynton's dominance, her ability to crush the will of those around her. He had seen such cases in his work, he said, but rarely so pronounced. The conversation was brief, but it confirmed Poirot's suspicions. The Boyntons were a powder keg, and the words he had overheard were the spark, as Gerard bid him good night. Poirot remained on the balcony, the stars now visible above the city. The mystery had begun, and he knew it would not leave him until it was solved. The chapter of this evening had closed with a question. Who had spoken those deadly words, and what drove them to such desperation? For now, Poirot would watch and wait, his mind as sharp as the Jerusalem night, ready for the journey to Petra and the secrets it would unveil. The hotel grew quiet, the courtyard now empty save for the rustle of palm fronds. Poirot rose, his cane tapping lightly on the tiles, and made his way to his room. Tomorrow he would follow the Boyntons to Petra, drawn by the whisper of murder and the challenge of unraveling a family's darkest truths. The stage was set, the players assembled, and Hercule Poirot, with his unmatched intellect, was ready to meet the appointment with death. Chapter 2. The Tyrant's Gaze. The King Solomon Hotel in Jerusalem buzzed with the quiet hum of travelers, their voices mingling with the clink of teacups and the soft rustle of palm fronds in the courtyard. Hercule Poirot sat in a cushioned wicker chair on the shaded veranda, his small, neat frame almost swallowed by the oversized furniture. His eyes, sharp and green as polished jade, scanned the scene with a deceptive air of leisure. To the casual observer, he was merely a fastidious little man enjoying a holiday. His black patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache meticulously waxed. But Poirot's mind was never truly at rest. Even now, as he sipped his tisane, his thoughts churned over the fragment of conversation he had overheard the previous night. "You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed?" The words, spoken in a low, urgent whisper, had drifted through an open window, slicing through the warm evening air like a blade. The veranda offered a perfect vantage point to observe the hotel's guests, and Poirot's attention was drawn to the Boynton family, who sat at a nearby table. The group was an odd tableau, dominated by the imposing figure of Mrs. Boynton. She was a large woman, her bulk accentuated by the severe black dress she wore, which seemed to absorb the sunlight, rather than reflect it. Her face, heavy and dough-like, bore no trace of warmth. Her small, dark eyes glittered with a predatory intensity as she surveyed her family, who sat around her like satellites orbiting a cold, unyielding planet. There was Lennox, the eldest son, his shoulders hunched, his face etched with lines of quiet despair. Beside him sat his wife Nadine, her delicate features taut with suppressed tension. Raymond, the second son, fidgeted with his napkin, his boyish good looks marred by a nervous energy. Carol, his sister, mirrored his unease, her fingers twisting a bracelet on her wrist. And then there was Ginevra, the youngest, a pale, ethereal girl whose wide eyes darted about as if expecting a blow at any moment. Poirot's gaze lingered on Mrs. Boynton. There was something grotesque in her stillness, a quality that reminded him of a spider at the center of a web, waiting for the faintest vibration to strike. He had seen her kind before, those who wielded power not through physical force but through the subtler, more insidious weapon of control. The family's deference to her was absolute, their every movement seeming to seek her approval, yet there was no affection in their eyes, only fear and resentment. The clatter of a tray broke Poirot's reverie. A young woman approached the Boyntons' table, her stride confident and her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple linen dress, but her bearing suggested a mind accustomed to precision and purpose. This, Poirot deduced, must be Sarah King, the medic he had heard mentioned by the hotel staff. She had arrived in Jerusalem to study local medical practices, a pursuit that intrigued Poirot for its blend of curiosity and discipline. Sarah paused at the Boyntons' table, offering a polite smile as she introduced herself. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Sarah King. I understand you're planning an excursion to Petra. I'm joining the same caravan and thought it might be nice to meet beforehand." Mrs. Boynton's head turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as they assessed Sarah. The silence that followed was heavy, almost theatrical, as if the matriarch were deciding whether this newcomer was worthy of her attention. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and rasping, like gravel dragged across stone. "Miss King, is it a doctor I hear? How ambitious." The word was laced with disdain, and Poirot noted the slight stiffening of Sarah's posture. But the young woman's smile didn't falter. "I'm still in training," she replied, her tone light but firm. "But I find the work rewarding. I hope we'll have a chance to talk more on the journey." Mrs. Boynton's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Oh, we shall see, Miss King, we shall see." Sarah inclined her head politely and moved away, but not before Poirot caught the flash of defiance in her eyes. He made a mental note. Sarah King was not one to be easily cowed. She would bear watching, not as a suspect yet, but as a potential ally in unraveling the mystery that clung to the Boyntons like a shadow. As Sarah retreated to a table across the veranda, another figure approached the Boyntons. This was Dr. Theodore Gerard, a French psychiatrist whose reputation for studying the dynamics of power and manipulation had reached even Poirot's ears. Gerard was a tall, lean man with a scholarly air, his glasses perched low on his nose and his graying hair swept back. He carried a notebook, its pages dog-eared and filled with meticulous notes. Poirot had overheard him discussing his research with another guest the previous evening, his voice animated as he described the psychological mechanisms of control. Now, as he greeted the Boyntons, his manner was courteous but probing, his questions about their travel plans laced with an almost clinical curiosity. "Madame Boynton," Gerard said, bowing slightly, "I understand you have a particular interest in historical sites. Petra must be quite the draw for you." Mrs. Boynton's gaze flicked to him, and Poirot noted the subtle shift in her expression, a tightening of the jaw, a slight flare of the nostrils. "History is a distraction," she said curtly. "I go where my family goes. They require my guidance." Gerard's smile was polite, but his eyes gleamed with interest. "Of course," he said. "Family dynamics are fascinating, are they not? The way one person can shape the behavior of others. It's almost an art." The comment hung in the air, and Poirot saw Lennox's hand tighten around his coffee cup. Carol's bracelet twisting ceased abruptly, and Raymond's head jerked up, his eyes darting between Gerard and his mother. Mrs. Boynton, however, remained impassive, her silence more commanding than any retort. Gerard, undeterred, made a small note in his book before excusing himself, leaving the family in a state of quiet agitation. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape. The Boyntons were not merely a dysfunctional family, they were a microcosm of oppression, each member bound by invisible chains to Mrs. Boynton's will. The overheard conversation, "She's got to be killed now," seemed less like an idle threat and more like the culmination of years of suppressed rage. But who had spoken those words, and to whom? The morning wore on, and the hotel staff began organizing the guests for the upcoming excursion to Petra. The Boyntons were joined by other travelers, including Lady Westholme, a formidable British woman whose booming voice and self-assured manner dominated any room she entered. She was a member of Parliament, Poirot learned, with a passion for archaeology that bordered on obsession. Her companion, Miss Pierce, was a mousy, nervous woman who seemed to exist in Lady Westholme's shadow, nodding eagerly at her every pronouncement. Then there was Jefferson Cope, an American lawyer with a warm smile and an easy charm that contrasted sharply with the Boyntons' gloom. Cope seemed particularly attentive to Nadine Lennox's wife, his conversation with her marked by a gentle solicitousness that drew a scowl from Mrs. Boynton. As the group prepared to depart, Poirot observed a small but telling incident. Raymond, attempting to help Carol with her luggage, was intercepted by Mrs. Boynton's sharp voice. "Raymond, leave that. Carol can manage. You will sit with me." Raymond froze, his hand still on the suitcase. For a moment, Poirot thought he saw a spark of defiance in the young man's eyes, but it was quickly extinguished. He released the suitcase and moved to his mother's side, his shoulders slumping. Carol, her face flushed, struggled with the bag alone, refusing Nadine's offer of help with a sharp shake of her head. The exchange was brief, but it spoke volumes about the family's dynamic. Mrs. Boynton's control was absolute, her every command a law unto itself. The caravan assembled in the hotel courtyard, a motley collection of cars and guides preparing for the journey to Petra. Poirot, who had decided to join the excursion on a whim, secured a place in one of the vehicles, positioning himself to observe the Boyntons closely. Sarah King, seated nearby, caught his eye and offered a small smile, which he returned with a polite nod. Dr. Gerard, engrossed in his notebook, climbed into another car, his pen moving furiously as he jotted down observations. Lady Wet, barking orders at the guides, ensured her luggage was handled with care, while Miss Pierce scurried behind her, clutching a parasol. Jefferson Cope, ever the peacemaker, chatted amiably with the drivers, smoothing over minor disputes with his easygoing charm. As the cars rolled out of Jerusalem, the landscape opened into a vast, sun-scorched expanse of desert, the horizon shimmering with heat. Poirot, accustomed to the orderly streets of European cities, found the stark beauty of the region both unsettling and exhilarating. The road to Petra was long, and the journey gave him ample time to reflect on the Boyntons. Lennox, he noted, seemed the most broken, his spirit worn down by years of submission. Nadine, his wife, carried herself with a quiet strength, but there was a sadness in her eyes that suggested she, too, bore the weight of Mrs. Boynton's tyranny. Raymond and Carol, younger and less resigned, showed flashes of rebellion, but their fear of their mother was palpable. Ginevra, the youngest, was an enigma. Her delicate beauty and nervous manner suggested a mind teetering on the edge of collapse. The caravan stopped briefly at a roadside rest, and Poirot took the opportunity to stretch his legs and observe further. Sarah King, standing apart from the group, was sketching the landscape in a small notebook, her pencil moving with quick, confident strokes. Poirot approached, his curiosity piqued. "Mademoiselle," he said, tipping his hat, "you have an eye for beauty, even in this desolate place." Sarah looked up, her expression wary but not unfriendly. "It's not desolate," she said. "It's alive, in its own way. The lines of the hills, the play of light on the sand, it's like a painting that changes every hour." Poirot nodded, impressed by her perception. "And what do you make of our fellow travelers, mademoiselle? Do they, too, change with the light?" Sarah's lips twitched in a half-smile. "Some of them are more transparent than others. The Boyntons, though there's something wrong there. That woman, Mrs. Boynton, she's like a storm cloud over them all." "An apt metaphor," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "And storms, they bring destruction, do they not?" Sarah met his gaze, her expression serious. "Sometimes, and sometimes they just make you want to run for cover." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp cry from the other side of the rest stop. Carol Boynton stood frozen, her face pale, as Mrs. Boynton berated her for some minor infraction, perhaps a dropped scarf or a misplaced word. The other travelers averted their eyes, but Poirot watched closely, noting the way Carol's hands trembled, the way Raymond's jaw clenched, the way Nadine stepped forward as if to intervene, only to be stopped by Lennox's gentle hand on her arm. Mrs. Boynton's voice, though low, carried a venom that made even the seasoned guides flinch. "You will learn, Carol," she said, her words dripping with malice. "You will all learn to do as I say, or you will regret it." The threat hung in the air, and Poirot felt a chill despite the desert heat. He glanced at Sarah, who stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw in her not just anger but a fierce determination. Sarah King, he realized, was not merely an observer, she was a force, one that might challenge Mrs. Boynton's reign of terror. As the caravan resumed its journey, Poirot settled back into his seat, his mind racing. The Boyntons were a powder keg, and the overheard conversation suggested someone was ready to light the fuse. But who? Raymond, with his nervous energy and suppressed rage; Carol, whose fear might mask a deeper resolve; Lennox, whose quiet despair could hide a breaking point; or perhaps Nadine, whose strength might conceal a desperate plan. And then there were the outsiders: Sarah Gerard, Lady Westholme, Jefferson Cope. Each had their own motives, their own secrets. The road wound through the desert, the cliffs of Petra looming in the distance like the walls of an ancient fortress. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, a rhythm that matched the ticking of his mind. The mystery was taking shape, its contours sharp and dangerous. Mrs. Boynton, he sensed, was the key not just to the family's misery but to the threat that hung over them all. And as the caravan drew closer to Petra, Poirot felt the weight of inevitability. Something was coming, something dark and final. He would be ready. The chapter closed with a final vivid image. Mrs. Boynton seated in the lead car, her silhouette framed against the blazing sun. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, swept over her family, and for a moment they met Poirot's. The contact was brief, but it sent a shiver through him. It was the gaze of a tyrant, a predator who knew her power and relished it. And in that moment, Poirot knew that the journey to Petra would not end without bloodshed. Chapter 3. Shadows over Petra. The caravan's arrival at Petra was a spectacle of dust and anticipation. The ancient city's rose-red cliffs rising like a mirage from the desert's heart. The narrow gorge, known as the Sick, wound its way through towering stone walls, their surfaces etched with the passage of time and the whispers of forgotten civilizations. The sun, high and unrelenting, cast long shadows that danced across the path, as if the very rocks were alive with secrets. Hercule Poirot, perched atop a sturdy camel, adjusted his straw hat and squinted against the glare, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the landscape and the company he kept. The air was thick with heat and the faint tang of sand, but Poirot's mind was cooler, sharper, already sifting through the undercurrents of tension that rippled through the group. The Boynton family, led by the indomitable Mrs. Boynton, was a study in contrasts against the vibrant backdrop of Petra. Mrs. Boynton, a hulking figure swathed in black, sat in a makeshift litter carried by 2 local guides, her presence as oppressive as the midday sun. Her stepchildren, Lennox, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra, trailed behind, their faces drawn, their steps heavy with the weight of her gaze. Lennox, the eldest, walked with a stooped posture, his eyes fixed on the ground as if searching for something he'd lost long ago. Raymond, younger and more restless, kept stealing glances at Sarah King, the young medic whose spirited demeanor seemed to defy the family's gloom. Carol, her expression a mask of quiet resignation, clutched her sister Ginevra's hand, while Ginevra herself moved with a theatrical grace, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting an ambush from the cliffs. Sarah King, riding a horse with an ease that spoke of confidence, was a breath of fresh air in the stifling atmosphere. Her dark hair was tied back and her keen eyes scanned the group with a mixture of curiosity and concern. She had already caught Poirot's attention with her quick wit and unyielding spirit, and now, as they approached the heart of Petra, he noted her growing unease. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, rode alongside her, his lean frame swaying with the rhythm of his camel. His conversation was sparse, but his gaze was analytical, lingering on the Boyntons with a professional interest that mirrored Poirot's own. The caravan came to a halt at the entrance to the treasury. Petra's iconic facade carved into the cliff face, its intricate columns and weathered stone seemed to pulse with history, a silent witness to the dramas unfolding before it. The group dismounted, stretching their limbs and murmuring in awe at the sight. Mrs. Boynton lowered from her litter, took her place in a folding chair, her eyes glinting with a predatory satisfaction as she surveyed her family. "Stay close," she barked, her voice cutting through the chatter like a whip. The siblings obeyed, clustering around her like moths drawn to a flame they couldn't escape. Poirot dismounted with a grace that belied his age, brushing the dust from his suit and adjusting his mustache with a practiced flick. He had chosen this trip to Petra as a respite from his usual cases. But the overheard conversation in Jerusalem, "You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed," had ignited his curiosity. The words, spoken with such cold intent, had lodged in his mind, and now, as he watched the Boyntons, he felt the familiar stirrings of a mystery. Who had spoken those words? And who was the she destined for death? Mrs. Boynton, with her tyrannical hold over her family, seemed the most likely candidate, but Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. The little grey cells, as he liked to call them, were already at work, piecing together the fragments of human behavior before him as the group set up camp near the treasury. The guides bustled about, pitching tents and preparing a simple meal of flatbread and spiced meat. The air was filled with the clatter of cookware and a low hum of conversation. But Poirot's attention was drawn to Raymond Boynton. The young man had wandered a short distance from the group, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Sarah King approached him, her voice low but firm. "You don't have to let her control you forever, you know," she said, her tone a mix of compassion and challenge. Raymond's head snapped up, his eyes flickering with a mix of hope and fear. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It's not just control, it's like she's inside our heads." Poirot, standing a discreet distance away, pretended to adjust his camera, but his ears were attuned to every word. Sarah's boldness intrigued him. She was unafraid to confront the Boynton family's dysfunction head-on, a trait that could prove both valuable and dangerous. Raymond's response, however, was more telling. The phrase "inside our heads" suggested a psychological stranglehold, one that went beyond mere authority. Poirot made a mental note to speak with Dr. Gerard later. The psychiatrist's expertise in manipulation might shed light on Mrs. Boynton's methods. The afternoon passed in a haze of exploration. The group, led by a local guide named Matt, ventured deeper into Petra, navigating the narrow Styx and climbing to the royal tombs. The cliffs, glowing in shades of pink and gold, seemed to close in around them, their sheer scale dwarfing the human dramas below. Lady Westholme, a British parliamentarian with a penchant for self-importance, strode ahead, her voice booming as she lectured on the Nabatean civilization. Jefferson Cope, an affable American traveler, trailed behind, his easy smile masking a keen interest in the Boyntons' dynamics. Poirot, walking at a leisurely pace, observed them all, noting the subtle glances, the whispered asides, the moments of hesitation that spoke louder than words. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, the group returned to the camp. Mrs. Boynton remained seated, her chair positioned like a throne overlooking the tents, her eyes cold and unblinking, followed her children's every move. Lennox, attempting to help Carol with her tent, fumbled under, her gaze dropping a peg into the sand. "Clumsy fool," Mrs. Boynton snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. Lennox flinched but said nothing, his face a mask of suppressed anger. Carol rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she retrieved the peg. Ginevra, meanwhile, sat apart, sketching the cliffs with feverish intensity, her pencil scratching against the paper as if trying to exorcise some inner demon. Dinner was a tense affair. The group gathered around a low table under a canopy of stars. The flickering light of lanterns cast eerie shadows, amplifying the unease that hung over the camp. Mrs. Boynton ate little, her attention fixed on her family, her lips curling into a faint, cruel smile whenever one of them faltered. Poirot, seated across from her, engaged her in polite conversation, probing gently with questions about her travels. "Petra is magnificent, is it not, madame?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "A place where history and secrets are carved into the very stone." Mrs. Boynton's gaze met his, and for a moment Poirot felt the full weight of her malice. "Secrets, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice low and mocking. "I have no use for secrets. My family knows better than to keep them from me." The words were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down, and Poirot accepted it with a nod, his mind racing. She was no ordinary tyrant. She reveled in her power, feeding on the fear she inspired. As the meal ended, Sarah King rose, her face set with determination. She approached Mrs. Boynton, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Mrs. Boynton, I must speak with you about your family's health," she said. "The strain of this trip is taking a toll, particularly on As a doctor, I strongly recommend you recommend—" Mrs. Boynton interrupted, her voice a venomous hiss. "You, a slip of a girl, presume to tell me how to manage my family." Her eyes, cold and unyielding, locked onto Sarah's, and the camp fell silent. Sarah held her ground, her jaw tight, but Poirot saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, until Mrs. Boynton leaned back, her smile triumphant. "Mind your own business, Miss King," she said, dismissing her with a wave. Sarah retreated, her cheeks flushed, and Poirot noted the reactions around the table. Raymond's fists were clenched, his knuckles white. Lennox stared at his plate, his expression unreadable. Carol's eyes darted between her stepmother and Sarah, while Ginevra let out a soft, nervous laugh that broke the silence. Dr. Gerard, watching from the sidelines, scribbled something in a small notebook, his face thoughtful. Lady Ever, the observer, raised an eyebrow but said nothing, while Jefferson Cope offered Sarah a sympathetic smile as the group dispersed to their tents. Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the camp. The cliffs loomed in the darkness, their silhouettes jagged against the starlit sky. The air was cooler now, but the tension remained, a palpable force that seemed to emanate from Mrs. Boynton herself. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, piercing scream that echoed through the valley, sharp and raw, cutting through the night like a blade. The sound came from the direction of the cliffs, where the six twisted into shadow. The camp erupted into chaos. Mahmoud, the guide, grabbed a lantern and shouted for calm. While the travelers stumbled from their tents, their faces pale, Raymond was the first to move, sprinting toward the sound with Sarah close behind. Poirot followed at a brisk pace, his heart pounding not with fear but with the thrill of the chase. The scream had been no ordinary cry. It carried the weight of terror, of something seen or done in the dark. They reached a narrow ledge overlooking a deep crevice, the lantern's light casting wild shadows on the rock. Ginevra stood there, her hands pressed to her face, her eyes wide with horror. "It was there," she gasped, pointing into the darkness. "A shadow, moving. It was watching us." Her voice broke, and she collapsed into Carol's arms. Sobbing, Poirot scanned the crevice, his eyes narrowing. The shadows were deep, the rocks impenetrable, but he saw nothing, no figure, no movement. Yet Ginevra's fear was real, her trembling too visceral to be an act. Sarah knelt beside her, checking her pulse, while Raymond hovered protectively, his face a mask of guilt and worry. Dr. Gerard joined them, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the group's panic. "She's in shock," he said quietly. "But there's no immediate danger." Poirot stepped closer to the ledge, his mind racing. A shadow, Ginevra had said. A metaphor, perhaps, for the unseen threat that hung over the camp, or something more tangible, a figure lurking in the darkness. He turned to Mahmoud, who was muttering about jinn and desert spirits. "Monsieur, have you seen anyone else in this area tonight?" Poirot asked, his tone sharp. Mahmoud shook his head, his eyes wide. "No F&D, only our group. The cliffs are empty at night, too dangerous." But his voice lacked conviction, and Poirot filed it away as another piece of the puzzle. As the group returned to the camp, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the cliffs. The scream had shifted something, a crack in the facade of the Boyntons' world. He thought of Raymond's whispered confession to Sarah, of Mrs. Boynton's cruel smile, of the syringe he would later find in the camp. The pieces were there, scattered like the stones of Petra, waiting for his little grey cells to arrange them into a coherent whole. The night was far from over, and the shadows, it seemed, had only begun to speak. The camp settled into an uneasy silence, the lanterns dimming as the travelers retreated to their tents. Poirot, however, did not sleep. He sat outside his tent, a small notebook in hand, jotting down observations in his precise, elegant script. The Boyntons were a family bound by fear. their every action dictated by Mrs. Boynton's will. But fear, Poirot knew, could breed rebellion, and rebellion could lead to murder. The question was not whether someone wanted Mrs. Boynton dead, many did, but who had the courage, or the desperation, to act. Raymond's words to Sarah echoed in Poirot's mind. "It's like she's inside our heads," the phrase suggested. A control so absolute it bordered on the supernatural. Yet Poirot was a man of reason. Mrs. Boynton's power was not magic but manipulation, a skill honed over years of breaking spirits. He thought of Dr. Gerard's interest in the family, his notebook filled with observations about control and coercion. Could the psychiatrist have seen something in Mrs. Boynton that went beyond her family, something that connected to the wider world of Petra's travelers? Poirot's thoughts turned to the other suspects. Lady Westholme, with her commanding presence and disdain for weakness, seemed an unlikely ally of the Boyntons, yet her sharp eyes missed nothing. Jefferson Cope, ever the charming outsider, had a knack for ingratiating himself, but his interest in the family felt too pointed to be casual. And Sarah King, her defiance of Mrs. Boynton had been bold, but was it reckless? Poirot considered the possibility that she, too, had a motive, perhaps tied to her growing affection for Raymond. The night deepened, the stars blazing in a sky untouched by city lights. Poirot closed his notebook and stood, his gaze sweeping the camp one last time. The cliffs of Petra loomed like sentinels, their secrets locked in stone. Tomorrow, he would begin his inquiries in earnest, probing the cracks in the Boyntons' facade, searching for the truth behind the scream. For now, he returned to his tent, his mind alight with possibilities. The mystery of Petra unfolding like the petals of a desert rose. The next morning dawned with a blistering heat, the sun climbing swiftly over the cliffs. The camp stirred to life, the travelers emerging with bleary eyes and strained expressions. Mrs. Boynton, as always, held court from her chair, her presence a dark cloud over the group. Poirot, refreshed despite his sleepless night, joined the others for breakfast, his demeanor cheerful but his eyes watchful. He noted the small details, Lennox's hesitation before speaking, Carol's quick glances at her stepmother, distracted humming as she sketched. Raymond, seated beside Sarah, seemed to draw strength from her presence, but his eyes still flickered toward Mrs. Boynton, as if expecting a reprimand. The day's itinerary included a trek to the monastery, a grand structure high in the cliffs, but Poirot's focus was elsewhere. He approached Dr. Gerard as the group prepared to depart, his tone casual but purposeful. "Monsieur le Docteur, you have studied the human mind. Tell me, what do you make of the Boynton family?" Gerard's eyes narrowed, his expression thoughtful. "They are a case study in control," he said. "Mrs. Boynton exerts a psychological dominance that is almost pathological. Her children are not merely obedient, they are prisoners of her will. It is fascinating but also deeply troubling." "And you believe this control could drive one of them to extreme measures?" Poirot asked, his voice low. Gerard hesitated, then nodded. "It is possible. When a mind is pushed to its breaking point, it may act in ways that seem irrational to others. But I suspect you already know this, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "I know only that the truth lies in the details, Doctor, and I intend to find them." As the group set out for the monastery, Poirot lagged behind, his eyes scanning the camp. He noticed a small object half buried in the sand near Mrs. Boynton, a syringe, its needle glinting in the sunlight. He knelt, careful not to be seen, and pocketed it, his mind racing. A syringe in a desert camp was no ordinary find. It suggested medical knowledge, intent, perhaps even premeditation. Who among the group had access to such a tool? Sarah King, with her medical training, Dr. Gerard with his expertise, or someone else hiding their knowledge behind a facade of innocence? The trek to the monastery was arduous, the path winding steeply through the cliffs. The group moved in silence, the weight of the previous night's scream lingering like a ghost. Poirot, despite his fastidious nature, navigated the terrain with surprising agility, his mind never straying from the mystery. He watched Raymond and Sarah, their heads bent together in quiet conversation, their connection growing stronger with each step. He noted Lady Westholme's brusque efficiency, her every movement calculated, and Jefferson Cope's easy charm, which seemed to mask a deeper purpose at the monastery. The group paused to rest, the vast facade towering above them. Mrs. Boynton, carried up the path in her litter, surveyed the scene with her usual disdain. "A pile of old stones," she muttered, loud enough for all to hear. "What a waste of effort." Her words drew a sharp glance from Mahmoud, who took pride in his heritage, but he said nothing, his face a mask of professionalism. Poirot seized the moment to speak with Raymond, drawing him aside under the pretext of admiring the view. "Monsieur Boynton," he began, his tone gentle, "you seem troubled. Is there something you wish to share?" Raymond's eyes darted toward his stepmother, then back to Poirot. "It's nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Just the place, it feels like it's closing in on us. Or perhaps it is not the place, but the people within it," Poirot suggested, his gaze steady. "You spoke to Mademoiselle King of your mother's influence. Tell me, how far does this influence extend?" Raymond's jaw tightened, and for a moment Poirot thought he would shut down. But then the words spilled out, low and urgent. "She's always there, Monsieur Poirot, in every thought, every decision. We can't escape her. Sometimes I think we'd do anything to be free." The confession hung in the air, heavy with implication. Poirot nodded, his expression neutral but his mind alight. "Thank you, Monsieur Boynton. You have given me much to consider." As the group began the descent back to the camp, Poirot's thoughts were a whirlwind of connections. Raymond's desperation, the syringe, the scream in the night, each was a thread in a tapestry of motive and opportunity. Mrs. Boynton's death, he sensed, was not a distant possibility but an imminent reality. The question was, who would act first, and how? The day passed in a blur of heat and tension. The group's interactions marked by strained politeness and unspoken fears. By evening the camp was once again cloaked in darkness, the cliffs looming like silent judges. Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open, his pen moving swiftly as he recorded his observations. The syringe was a crucial clue, but it raised more questions than answers. Was it a tool of murder or a red herring planted to mislead? And what of Ginevra's scream, her talk of a shadow? Was she a witness, a victim, or something else entirely? As the fire crackled, Poirot's gaze fell on Mrs. Boynton, still seated in her chair, her eyes glinting in the firelight. She was a figure of menace, a spider at the center of a web, but even spiders could be caught. Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve hardening. The shadows of Petra held their secrets, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to darkness. He would find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 4. A crack in the facade. The sun dipped low over Petra, casting long shadows across the rose-red cliffs that cradled the ancient city. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stone, warmed by the day's relentless heat, now softening into the cool promise of evening. Hercule Poirot adjusted his hat, his sharp eyes scanning the encampment where the travelers had settled for the night. The Boynton family, the focal point of his discreet observations, moved with the stiffness of marionettes, their actions dictated by the invisible strings of Mrs. Boynton's will. The overheard whisper from Jerusalem, "You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed," echoed in his mind, a persistent riddle that refused to be dismissed. The camp was a patchwork of tents and makeshift tables, the travelers' voices mingling with the clatter of tin plates and the low hum of a generator. Poirot, ever the observer, who positioned himself near the edge of the group, a vantage point that allowed him to watch without being conspicuous. His small notebook rested in his pocket, but he preferred to commit details to memory, letting his little gray cells weave the threads of human behavior into a tapestry of motive and opportunity. Mrs. Boynton sat at the center of the camp, her bulk dominating a folding chair that creaked under her weight. Her eyes, cold and unblinking, surveyed her family like a predator assessing its prey. Lennox, the eldest son, sat slumped, his face etched with resignation as he stared at the ground. Raymond, the younger son, fidgeted, his gaze darting between his mother and Sarah King, who stood apart, her posture defiant yet wary. Carol, the elder daughter, moved with mechanical precision, arranging plates with a forced calm that betrayed her tension. Ginevra, the youngest, flitted about, her movements erratic, her laughter too sharp, as if she were performing for an unseen audience. Poirot's attention shifted to the other travelers. Lady Westholm, her posture rigid and her voice carrying the weight of self-assumed authority, was lecturing Jefferson Cope on the historical significance of Petra. Cope, ever affable, nodded with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, sat alone, scribbling in a notebook, his expression one of clinical detachment. Sarah King, the young medic, lingered near the Boyntons, her brow furrowed as she watched Mrs. Boynton's interactions with her children. Poirot noted the spark of rebellion in Sarah's eyes, a contrast to the subdued obedience of the Boynton siblings. Dinner was served under a canopy, the flickering lanterns casting eerie shadows on the faces of the diners. Mrs. Boynton's presence loomed over the meal, her silence more oppressive than any words. She ate slowly, deliberately, her fork pausing in mid-air as she fixed her gaze on Carol, who had dared to laugh at a comment from Jefferson Cope. "Carol, dear," Mrs. Boynton said, her voice syrupy with menace, "do try to behave with some decorum. We are not at a carnival." The table fell silent, Carol's face flushing as she lowered her eyes. Poirot's fingers twitched, itching to record the moment, but he resisted, committing the exchange to memory instead. As the meal progressed, Poirot noticed a subtle shift. Lennox, usually passive, leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Mother, perhaps we could discuss the itinerary for tomorrow. I thought we might explore the high place of sacrifice." The suggestion was mild, but Poirot caught the faint tremor in Lennox's voice, a crack in his usual deference. Mrs. Boynton's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air seemed to thicken with unspoken defiance. "We will follow the guide's plan, Lennox," she replied, her tone final. "You know how tiring these excursions can be for me." Lennox's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, retreating into his customary silence. Poirot's gaze flicked to Raymond, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and fear. Sarah King, seated across from Raymond, offered him a small, encouraging smile, but her eyes held a flicker of concern. Poirot sensed a current of rebellion beneath the surface, fragile but growing, like a seedling pushing through stone. After dinner, the group dispersed, some retiring to their tents, others lingering to smoke or converse in low tones. Poirot, feigning interest in a map of Petra, moved closer to the Boyntons' tent, where Mrs. Boynton was issuing instructions to Carol about packing for the next day's trek. "And do be careful with my medicine case, Carol," she said sharply. "You know how particular I am about it." Carol nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the straps of a leather satchel. Poirot's eyes narrowed at the mention of the medicine case, his mind cataloguing the detail for later scrutiny. As he strolled back toward the main camp, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small object glinting in the sand near the edge of the clearing. He paused, ensuring no one was watching, then bent to retrieve it. It was a syringe, its needle capped but unmistakably used, the faint residue of a clear liquid clinging to its interior. Poirot turned it over in his gloved hands, his mind racing. A syringe in a camp of tourists was not unusual. Many carried medical supplies, but its presence here, discarded so carelessly, suggested something more sinister. He slipped it into his pocket, resolving to investigate further. The evening wore on, the stars emerging in a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the camp's feeble lights. Poirot joined Dr. Gerard at a small table, where the psychiatrist was sipping tea and observing the group with a detached curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot," Gerard said, his accent clipped, "you seem to find our little party as fascinating as I do." Poirot smiled, his mustache twitching. "The human mind, doctor, is a puzzle more intricate than any labyrinth, and here, in this isolated place, the pieces are beginning to reveal themselves." Gerard raised an eyebrow. "You speak of puzzles, but I see cages. That woman," he nodded toward Mrs. Boynton's tent, "has built a prison of fear around her family. It is a study in control." "Nan," Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "A prison, yes. But even the strongest bars can bend under pressure. Tell me, doctor, have you observed anything unusual in the camp?" Gerard hesitated, his fingers tapping his notebook. "There are many tensions here, monsieur. The Boyntons are not alone in their secrets. I have seen Lady Westholme watching Mrs. Boynton with a hatred that is almost palpable. And Mr. Cope, so charming, yet his eyes betray a certain calculation." Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. "And what of medical supplies? Doctor, have you noticed anything amiss?" Gerard's expression sharpened. "You are perceptive, monsieur. I did notice that my own medical kit was disturbed this morning. Nothing was missing, but the contents were not as I left them. I assumed it was the work of a curious servant, but now..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the Boyntons' tent. Poirot said nothing, but his mind was alight with possibilities. A disturbed medical kit, a discarded syringe, small clues. But in Poirot's experience, the smallest threads often unraveled the largest tapestries. As the night deepened, Poirot retired to his tent, but sleep eluded him. He sat by a lantern, his notebook open, though he wrote nothing. Instead, he replayed the evening's observations. Lennox's flicker of rebellion, Carol's trembling hands, Raymond's nervous glances at Sarah, the syringe in the sand. The pieces were scattered, but Poirot felt the shape of the puzzle forming. Mrs. Boynton's dominance was a catalyst, but for what? A desperate act of defiance. A calculated plan. And who among this eclectic group family, strangers, allies, held the key to the whispered threat he had overheard in Jerusalem? The camp grew quiet, the only sounds, the distant howl of a jackal, and the rustle of canvas in the breeze. Poirot's thoughts turned to Sarah King, whose defiance of Mrs. Boynton had marked her as a potential ally or a target. He recalled her sharp intelligence, her compassion for the Boynton siblings, and her unguarded moments with Raymond. There was a strength in her, but also a vulnerability, a desire to right the wrongs she saw. Poirot wondered if her courage would draw her deeper into the web of danger that surrounded the Boyntons. As he extinguished his lantern, Poirot's mind settled on the syringe, now safely tucked in his valise. It was a tangible clue, a thread to pull, but its significance remained elusive. Was it a tool of mercy used to ease pain, or a weapon of malice, discarded to conceal a crime? The answer lay in the days ahead, in the shadows of Petra's cliffs and the secrets of its travelers. For now, Poirot closed his eyes, his little gray cells humming with anticipation, ready to unravel the mystery that lay just beneath the surface of this fractured facade. The next morning dawned with a heat that pressed against the skin, the sun climbing swiftly over the cliffs. The camp stirred to life, the travelers preparing for another day of exploration. Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the dust, joined the group for breakfast, his eyes scanning for any sign of unease. Mrs. Boynton was already seated, her presence a dark cloud over the meal. She ate in silence, her gaze sweeping the table, daring anyone to challenge her authority. The siblings moved with the same subdued caution, but Poirot noted a subtle difference. Lennox's shoulders were straighter, his eyes less averted. The crack in his facade, though small, was unmistakable. Sarah King approached Poirot as the group dispersed, her expression a mix of determination and unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you. It's about Mrs. Boynton." Poirot inclined his head, gesturing for her to walk with him away from the others. They stopped near a cluster of rocks, out of earshot. "What is it, mademoiselle?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Sarah hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. "It's Raymond," she said at last. "He told me something last night after dinner, he said. He said he's thought about killing her, his mother. I mean, he didn't mean it, not really, but the way he spoke it was like he's been pushed to the edge. I'm worried, Monsieur Poirot. I think something terrible is going to happen." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing. Raymond's confession, though not unexpected, added a new layer to the puzzle. "And what did you say to him, mademoiselle?" he asked. "I told him he mustn't think like that," Sarah replied, her voice firm, "that there's another way, that he can break free without doing something he'd regret. But I'm not sure he believed me. And then there's Mrs. Boynton. She saw us talking, and the way she looked at me, it was like she knew." Sarah shivered, despite the heat. "I don't trust her, Monsieur Poirot. She's dangerous." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You are wise to be cautious, mademoiselle. But tell me, have you noticed anything else? Anything out of place?" Sarah frowned, thinking, "There was something odd yesterday, when I was helping with the medical supplies. I thought I saw someone near Dr. Gerard's tent, rummaging through his things. I couldn't tell who it was. They moved too quickly, but it didn't feel right. And then there's Ginevra. She's been acting so strangely, like she's hiding something. I caught her staring at her mother last night, and it wasn't fear in her eyes. It was something else." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his heightened interest. "Thank you, Mademoiselle King. You have given me much to consider. I advise you to say nothing of this to anyone else, not even Monsieur Raymond. Trust Hercule Poirot to handle this matter." Sarah nodded, relief flickering across her face. "I will, monsieur, thank you." She turned to rejoin the group, leaving Poirot alone with his thoughts. The syringe, the disturbed medical kit, Raymond's confession, Ginevra's strange behavior. The threads were multiplying, each one leading deeper into the labyrinth of motive and opportunity. As the group set out for the day's excursion, Poirot lingered behind, his eyes scanning the camp. He noticed Jefferson Cope watching the Boyntons with an intensity that belied his usual charm. Lady Westholme, too, seemed preoccupied, her usual bluster subdued as she glanced repeatedly at Mrs. Boynton's tent. Poirot's instincts told him that the syringe was only the beginning, a clue that pointed to a larger truth. But what, and who? The day passed in a blur of heat and dust, the travelers exploring the ancient tombs and temples of Petra. Poirot moved among them, his questions subtle, his observations sharp. He spoke with Carol, who admitted to feeling trapped but denied any knowledge of medical supplies. He questioned Lennox, whose brief moment of defiance seemed to have faded, replaced by a weary acceptance. Ginevra, when approached, responded with a theatrical laugh and a cryptic remark about shadows in the stone. Poirot filed each response away, each one a piece of the puzzle. Though the picture remained incomplete, by evening the camp was alive with the buzz of conversation, the travelers recounting the day's discoveries. Poirot, however, was distracted, his mind returning to the syringe. He excused himself early, retreating to his tent to examine it again. Under the lantern's glow, he studied the faint residue. His knowledge of chemistry limited but sufficient to recognize the need for an expert, Dr. Gerard perhaps, or Sarah King. But he would need to tread carefully. Crust was a fragile commodity in this camp. As he prepared for bed, Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustle outside his tent. He froze, listening. The sound came again, closer now, followed by the faint crunch of sand underfoot. Someone was moving in the darkness, their steps deliberate but cautious. Poirot reached for his walking stick, his heart steady despite the sudden tension. He parted the tent flap, peering into the night, but saw only shadows. The camp was still, the stars above indifferent to the secrets below. Returning to his cot, Poirot lay awake, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The syringe, the whispered threat, the crack in Lennox's facade, Sarah's warning about Raymond, Ginevra's cryptic words. Each was a thread, but the pattern was elusive. He knew one thing with certainty: the danger was real, and it was close. Tomorrow, he would pull harder at these threads, unraveling the truth before it could unravel the lives caught in its web. The night stretched on, the silence broken only by the distant cry of a desert creature. Poirot closed his eyes, but his little grey cells did not rest. They churned, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that was as ancient and unyielding as the cliffs of Petra itself. Chapter 5. The fatal hour. The sun hung low over the rose-red cliffs of Petra, casting long shadows across the ancient city's carved facades. The air was heavy with the day's heat, though a faint breeze stirred the dust as the group prepared for their trek through the narrow Six. Hercule Poirot, his straw hat tilted slightly against the glare, stood apart, observing the travelers with his characteristic scrutiny. His small, precise hands adjusted his tie, a gesture that belied the sharpness of his mind as it churned over the unsettling undercurrents he had sensed since Jerusalem. The Boynton family, as always, drew his attention. Mrs. Boynton sat in a folding chair at the camp's edge, her massive form immobile, her eyes glinting with a predatory intensity. She was a grotesque statue, her bulk draped in black, her face a mask of cruel satisfaction as she watched her stepchildren, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra move about with the hesitancy of caged animals. Her presence was a weight, a suffocating force that seemed to drain the vitality from those around her. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the way her lips curled slightly when Raymond glanced at Sarah King, the young medic who had joined the excursion. Sarah, with her clear eyes and determined stride, was a contrast to the Boynton's subdued demeanor. She moved with purpose, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, her dark hair tied back to combat the desert heat. Poirot had noted her intelligence and compassion, qualities that made her an anomaly in this tense group. She was speaking to Raymond now, her voice low but animated, and Poirot caught the faint flush on Raymond's face, a spark of defiance, perhaps, or something softer. Mrs. Boynton's eyes narrowed, and Poirot felt a chill despite the warmth. That gaze was a weapon honed over years of domination. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, approached Poirot, his expression thoughtful. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his accent soft but precise, "have you observed the dynamics of this family? It is a study in control. The mother, she is like a spider, spinning her web around them all." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "Indeed, Dr. Madame Boynton is a most formidable figure. One wonders how such a web is woven and what it takes to break it." Gerard's eyes darkened. "In my studies, I have seen personalities that thrive on power, on the submission of others, but such control often breeds rebellion or despair." Poirot filed the comment away, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. The Boyntons, the travelers, the whispered threat from Jerusalem. It was a tapestry of motives and secrets, and he was determined to unravel it. But for now, the group was moving, the guides calling for the trek to begin. Mrs. Boynton, too frail or too imperious to join the walk, remained at the camp, her chair positioned to oversee the comings and goings. Her maid, a nervous woman named Miss Pierce, hovered nearby, her hands fluttering like frightened birds. The trek through the Six was a journey into another world. The narrow, winding paths were flanked by towering cliffs, their surfaces etched with the passage of centuries. The group moved in a loose procession, their voices hushed by the grandeur of the surroundings. Poirot walked at a leisurely pace, his polished shoes incongruous against the rocky terrain, his eyes darting from one face to another. Lady Westholme, the formidable British parliamentarian, strode ahead with the confidence of a general, her sketching pad tucked under her arm. Jefferson Cope, the affable American, lingered near Carol Boynton. His attempts at conversation met with polite but distant responses. Lennox, the eldest Boynton's son, walked alone, his shoulders hunched, his face a mask of quiet resignation. Sarah and Raymond lagged behind, their heads bent close. Poirot, ever discreet, positioned himself just within earshot, catching fragments of their conversation. "She watches everything," Raymond was saying, his voice tight. "Every move, every word. It's like living in a prison." Sarah's response was firm but gentle. "You don't have to stay in that prison, Raymond. You're stronger than you think." Poirot's lips pursed, a romance perhaps, but one shadowed by fear. He glanced back toward the camp where Mrs. Boynton's silhouette was still visible, her presence a dark anchor even at a distance. The sun dipped lower, painting the cliffs in hues of crimson and gold, and Poirot felt the weight of time pressing in. Something was coming, he could sense it. Like a storm gathering on the horizon, the group reached a wider section of the Sick, where the guides paused to point out a particularly striking carving, a temple facade, its columns worn but majestic. The travelers spread out, some taking photographs, others scribbling notes. Poirot lingered near a boulder, his attention drawn to Ginevra Boynton, the youngest of the family. She was a striking girl, her auburn hair catching the light, but her movements were erratic, her eyes darting as if she saw things others did not. She muttered to herself, her words indistinct, and Poirot wondered if her fragility was genuine or a performance. "Ginevra," Carol called softly, approaching her. "Sister, come, let's stay with the group." Ginevra's head snapped up, her expression wild for a moment before softening. "I'm fine, Carol. I feel her, even here." Carol's face tightened, and she glanced back toward the camp. "She's not here." Ginny tried to enjoy this. Poirot noted the exchange, his mind cataloguing the fear that threaded through the family. Ginevra's words suggested a psychological weight, but was it delusion or something more tangible? He made a mental note to speak with Dr. Gerard later. Expertise might shed light on the girl's state of mind. As the group continued, the Six grew narrower, the cliffs closing in like the walls of a labyrinth. The air cooled, and the silence deepened, broken only by the crunch of footsteps and the occasional murmur. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement. Lennox, who had been trailing behind, stumbled, his hand catching a jagged outcrop. Blood welled from a small cut, and Sarah was at his side in an instant, her medical bag open. "It's nothing," Lennox muttered, pulling his hand away, but Sarah's touch was firm. "Let me clean it," she insisted, her voice calm, but authoritative. She worked quickly, dabbing the wound with antiseptic, her movements precise. Poirot watched, noting Lennox's reluctance. the way his eyes avoided Sarah's. There was shame there, or perhaps guilt. The trek continued, the group winding deeper into Petra's heart. The guide spoke of ancient trade routes, of kings, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere. He was piecing together the fragments: the overheard threat, Mrs. Boynton's cruelty, the syringe he had found the previous day. It was a small thing, barely noticeable in the camp's clutter, but to Poirot it was a beacon. Someone here had medical knowledge, or access to it. Sarah perhaps, or Dr. Gerard, or someone else entirely. The sun was nearly gone when the group began their return to the camp. The cliffs glowed faintly, their edges softened by dusk. Poirot's pace slowed, his eyes scanning the group. Lady Westholme was ahead, her stride unbroken, but Jefferson Cope lingered near Carol, his expression one of quiet concern. Raymond and Sarah walked together, their heads bent close, and Poirot noted the way Raymond's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting gesture, but one that spoke volumes. As they neared the camp, a figure emerged from the shadows: Miss Pierce, her face pale, her hands wringing. "Oh, thank goodness you're back," she stammered. It's Mrs. Boynton." Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained impassive. He followed Miss Pierce to the camp's edge, where Mrs. Boynton sat in her chair, her head slumped forward, her hands limp in her lap. The group gathered, their voices a mix of shock and confusion. Sarah knelt beside the body, her fingers searching for a pulse. Her face tightened, and she looked up at Poirot. "She's dead," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with unease. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over the scene. Mrs. Boynton's face was slack, her eyes half open, her skin already taking on the pallor of death. He leaned closer, his gaze catching a tiny mark on her wrist: a puncture, barely visible, but unmistakable. His mind raced, cataloguing the implications. Poison, perhaps, or a drug. The syringe flashed in his memory, its significance now glaring. "Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Gerard said, his voice low, "this is no natural death." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Nan, doctor, this is murder." The group erupted into murmurs, some stepping back, others pressing closer. Carol's face was pale, her hands trembling, while Ginevra let out a soft, keening sound. Raymond stood frozen, his eyes fixed on his mother's body, and Poirot noted the flicker of relief that crossed his face before guilt replaced it. Lady Westholme's lips were a thin line, her eyes unreadable, while Jefferson Cope's hands fidgeted, his usual charm replaced by unease. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the group. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "we are in a remote place, and the authorities will not arrive until tomorrow. I, Hercule Poirot, will take charge of this matter. We have 24 hours to uncover the truth." His eyes swept over the group, taking in their reactions. Fear, guilt, defiance. Each face told a story, and Poirot was determined to read them all. Sarah stood, her medical bag still open, her expression resolute. "I'll help however I can," she said, meeting Poirot's gaze. "Merci, Mademoiselle King," Poirot replied. "Your expertise will be most valuable." As the group dispersed, some to their tents, others lingering in shocked silence, Poirot remained by the body, his mind already at work. The syringe, the puncture mark, the whispered threat from Jerusalem, it was all connected, a puzzle that Mia demanded his little grey cells. He glanced at the cliffs, their shadows now deep and impenetrable, and felt the weight of the task ahead. Mrs. Boynton had been a tyrant, a figure of fear and loathing, but who among them had hated her enough to kill? And how? The stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light in the vast desert sky. Poirot's thoughts were a whirlwind, but his resolve was unshaken. The fatal hour had struck, and the truth lay hidden in the shadows of Petra. He would find it, no matter the cost. The camp settled into an uneasy quiet, the air thick with suspicion. Poirot moved to his tent, his notebook in hand, already sketching a timeline. The syringe, he noted, had been found near the dining area, its needle capped but empty. Had it been used, or was it a decoy? He wrote down the names of the travelers, circling Sarah and Dr. Gerard for their medical knowledge, but not ruling out the others. Lady Westholme's imperious demeanor suggested a woman capable of decisive action, while Jefferson Cope's eagerness to please might hide a deeper motive. The Boyntons, of course, were at the heart of it, each with a reason to wish their stepmother dead. He paused, his pen hovering over Raymond's name. The young man's conversation with Sarah had been revealing, his words heavy with resentment. Yet there was something else, a spark of hope, perhaps, kindled by Sarah's encouragement. Could love have driven him to murder, or was it fear that had pushed him over the edge? Poirot closed his notebook, his mind racing. The desert was silent, now, save for the faint rustle of wind through the cliffs. He stepped outside, his eyes drawn to Mrs. Boynton's chair, now empty, her body covered with a tarp until the authorities could take over. The puncture mark nagged at him, a small but critical detail. It suggested precision planning, a murder, not of passion, but of calculation. He returned to his tent, his thoughts turning to the next steps. He would need to interview each suspect, to probe their alibis and motives. Sarah's medical bag would be a starting point, had anything been taken, or planted. Dr. Gerard's insights into Mrs. Boynton's psyche would be invaluable, as would his observations of the family. And Ginevra, her erratic behavior could be a clue, or a distraction. The night deepened, the stars bright against the black sky. Poirot lay on his cot, his eyes open, his mind refusing to rest. The puzzle was complex, the pieces scattered, but he had faced such challenges before. In the silence of Petra, he would find the truth, and the killer would be revealed. The hours ticked by, each one a step closer to the deadline. Poirot's resolve hardened, his determination a beacon in the darkness. The fatal hour had passed, but the mystery was only beginning. He would solve it, as he always did, with the precision of his little grey cells and the clarity of justice. As dawn approached, the camp stirred, the first light creeping over the cliffs. Poirot rose, his mind clear, his purpose set. The day ahead would be one of questions, of revelations, of truths uncovered in the shadow of death. Mrs. Boynton's reign was over, but her legacy lingered, a web of secrets that Poirot was determined to untangle. The desert stretched before him, vast and unyielding, but Hercule Poirot was undaunted. The truth was out there, hidden among the suspects, the clues, the whispers of Petra, and he would find it, before the sun set again. Chapter 6. Motives in the sand. The sun hung low over Petra, casting long shadows across the rose-red cliffs that seemed to pulse with the weight of secrets. The air was heavy with dust and the faint lingering scent of jasmine from the camp's makeshift garden, a futile attempt to soften the harshness of the desert. Hercule Poirot sat on a weathered stone bench, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon as if the answers to Mrs. Boynton's murder might be etched into the ancient rock. The discovery of her body, with that telltale puncture mark on her wrist, had transformed the caravan's uneasy tension into a palpable dread. Each member of the group, from the cowed Boynton siblings to the aloof Lady Westholme, carried a motive as heavy as the stones around them. Poirot's task was to sift through the sand of their alibis and unearth the truth. The camp was a hive of whispers as the travelers gathered for the evening meal. The murder had shattered their fragile civility, and every glance was laced with suspicion. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the way Carol Boynton's hands trembled as she passed a plate of flatbread, her eyes darting to her siblings as if seeking reassurance. Lennox, the eldest, sat hunched, his face a mask of exhaustion, while Raymond, usually so quick to speak, stared silently into the fire. Ginevra, the youngest, was absent, her tent flap closed, though faint sobs had been heard earlier. Sarah King, the young medic, sat apart, her sharp gaze fixed on the group, as if she, too, were piecing together the puzzle. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, leaned toward Poirot, his voice low. "Mon ami," Gerard said, his accent thick with concern. "This family is a study in oppression. Mrs. Boynton was no mere tyrant, she was a sadist, delighting in their pain. Her death is no surprise, only its method." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "Oui, doctor, but it is the method that intrigues me. A puncture mark, precise, deliberate, not the act of impulse, but of calculation. And yet, who among them had the means, the opportunity, and the nerve?" Gerard's eyes narrowed. "All of them, perhaps, or none. The human mind, Monsieur Poirot, is a labyrinth. Mrs. Boynton built hers with cruelty, but her children, they are trapped within it still." Poirot's gaze shifted to the Boynton siblings. Carol, her pale face framed by dark curls, seemed to shrink under the weight of her own thoughts. She had been the first to speak to Poirot after the body was found, her voice trembling as she confessed her hatred for her stepmother. "She made us nothing," Carol had whispered, her hands twisting the hem of her skirt. "She took our lives, our choices, everything. I wished her dead 1,000 times." The admission had been raw, unguarded, and Poirot had noted the flicker of guilt in her eyes. Was it the guilt of a wish fulfilled, or something more? Lennox, sitting beside his sister, was a study in defeat. His broad shoulders, which might once have carried strength, slumped as if crushed by years of submission. Poirot recalled their brief conversation earlier that day, when Lennox had spoken of his wife Nadine, and their strained marriage under Mrs. Boynton's watchful eye. "She controlled everything," Lennox had said, his voice hollow. "Even my thoughts. I don't know who I am without her." The words had struck Poirot as both a lament and a confession. Could a man so broken find the strength to kill? Raymond, the eldest son, was harder to read. His handsome face, with its sharp jaw and troubled eyes, held a restless energy. Poirot had overheard him speaking with Sarah King the previous evening, his voice low and urgent. "She's a monster," Raymond had said, his hands clenched. "She's killing us, Sarah, bit by bit. I can't stand it anymore." Sarah had touched his arm, her voice soothing. But Poirot had seen the fire in Raymond's eyes, a fire that could spark rebellion or murder. Now, as Raymond sat by the fire, his silence was louder than words. Ginevra, the youngest, remained an enigma. Her absence at dinner was conspicuous, and Poirot made a mental note to seek her out. Earlier, he had glimpsed her pacing near the camp's edge, her red hair wild in the wind, her lips moving as if speaking to an invisible audience. Dr. Gerard had described her as unstable, a girl whose mind had been warped by her stepmother's cruelty. She lives in a world of her own, Gerard had said. Half genius, half broken. I fear what she might do or what she might have done. Poirot wondered if Ginevra's theatrical nature hid a deeper truth, or if her fragility was itself a motive. The other travelers were no less intriguing. Lady Westholme, with her imperious air and penchant for lecturing, had been quick to assert her innocence, claiming she was sketching the cliffs at the time of the murder. Yet Poirot had noted the stiffness in her posture, the way her eyes avoided. His Jefferson Cope, the affable American, was overly cooperative, offering details of his whereabouts with a smile that seemed too polished. And then there was Sarah King, whose intelligence and compassion made her a valuable ally, but whose growing attachment to Raymond Boynton raised questions. Could her loyalty to him cloud her judgment? As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and approached the Boynton siblings. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I would speak with each of you in turn. The truth, it hides in the shadows, but I, Hercule Poirot, will bring it to light." Carol was the first to follow him to a quiet corner of the camp, where a single lantern cast flickering shadows on the sand. She sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't kill her," she blurted before Poirot could speak. "I hated her, yes, but I wouldn't. I couldn't." Poirot raised a hand, his expression gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle, calm yourself. Tell me of your stepmother. What was it that made her so formidable?" Carol's voice trembled. As she spoke, she controlled everything. "Our money, our time, our thoughts. She'd make us sit for hours, just watching her while she smiled that horrible smile. If we disobeyed, she'd punish us not with words, but with silence. It was worse. You'd feel invisible, worthless." Her voice broke. "I used to dream of running away, but where could I go? She owned us." Poirot listened, his eyes never leaving her face. "And on the day she died, mademoiselle, where were you?" "I was with Nadine, walking through the Six. We were talking about leaving, about starting over. But when we came back, she was already dead." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do it, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm glad she's gone. Does that make me a monster?" Poirot's voice was soft. "To feel relief at the end of suffering, mademoiselle, is human, but tell me, did you see anything unusual that day? A person, a movement, perhaps?" Carol hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just the usual, everyone avoiding her, like always." Poirot thanked her and sent her back to the camp, his mind turning over her words. Her hatred was genuine, but her fear seemed to outweigh her guilt. Next, he called for Lennox. Lennox sat heavily, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice flat. "I didn't kill her. I didn't have the strength." Poirot tilted his head. "Strength, monsieur, is not always in the body. Sometimes it is in the heart, or the mind. Tell me of your life with Mrs. Boynton." Lennox's jaw tightened. "She was a prison. Every day she'd remind me I was nothing without her. Nadine wanted to leave, but I couldn't. She'd taken everything from me, my confidence, my will. Even now I feel her watching." He shuddered. "When I saw her body, I felt free, for the first time in years." "And your movements that day?" Poirot asked. "I was with Raymond. Near the camp we were talking. Just talking when we heard the scream. We ran back. She was already gone." Lennox's voice cracked. "I didn't do it, but I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to." Poirot nodded, dismissing him. Lennox's despair was palpable, but despair could drive a man to desperate acts. Raymond was next, his posture tense as he sat across from Poirot. "Monsieur Boynton," Poirot began, "you spoke with Mademoiselle King of your stepmother's cruelty. You said you could not stand it. What did you mean?" Raymond's eyes flashed. "I meant I was done being her puppet. She controlled us all. Lennox Carroll, he neighbor. She'd make us beg for scraps of freedom, then snatch them away. I told Sarah I wanted it to end, but I didn't mean murder." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "I swear, I didn't touch her." "Where were you when she died?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. "With Sarah for part of the time. Then, I went to check on Ginevra. She was upset, ranting about shadows. I stayed with her until we heard the scream." Raymond's hands clenched. "I didn't do it, Monsieur but I'm not sorry she's dead." Poirot studied him, noting the intensity in his eyes. Raymond's passion could be love for Sir or hatred for his stepmother. Either could be a motive. Ginevra was the last to speak, and Poirot found her in her tent, her face pale and tear-streaked. She sat cross-legged on a rug, her hands twisting a piece of red ribbon. "You want to know if I killed her?" she said before Poirot could speak, her voice high and brittle. "I didn't, but I saw her die." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "You saw Mademoiselle tell me?" Ginevra's eyes darted to the tent flap, as if expecting an intruder. "I was near the camp, hiding. I saw her sitting there, like a queen on her throne. Then, a shadow moved quick, like a snake. I didn't see a face, just movement. And then she was still, too still." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I think it was the devil, come to take her." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle. "A shadow, you say? Could it have been a person, mademoiselle? Someone you know?" Ginevra shook her head, her eyes wild. I don't know, but she deserved it. She was evil, monsieur. Poirot, evil. Poirot thanked her and left the tent, his mind racing. Ginevra's story was theatrical, but was it a performance or a glimpse of truth? A shadow could be a metaphor or it could be a clue. As the night deepened, Poirot sought out Dr. Gerard, finding him near the camp's edge, studying the stars. Dr. Poirot said, "You spoke of Mrs. Boynton's sadistic control. Could such control drive a person to murder?" Gerard nodded. "Absolutely. Her children were her prisoners, their minds warped by years of abuse. Any one of them could have snapped. But there's something else." He hesitated. "Mrs. Boynton's behavior, it was pathological. I've studied cases like hers. She thrived on power, on breaking others. Her death might not just be could be justice." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Justice, doctor, or vengeance?" Gerard shrugged. "In this case, perhaps they are the same." Poirot returned to his tent, his mind a whirl of motives. Carol's hatred, Lennox's despair, Raymond's rebellion, Ginevra's instability, each was a thread in the tapestry of Mrs. Boynton's death. But there was something more, something tangible. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the syringe he had found the previous day. Its presence suggested medical knowledge, perhaps a poison. Sarah King, with her medical training, came to mind, but so did Dr. Gerard. Even Lady Westhorn, with her air of authority, might have access to such tools. As he prepared for bed, Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a rustling outside his tent. He stepped outside, lantern in hand, and found a scrap of paper half buried in the sand. He knelt, brushing away the dust, and read the words scrawled in a hurried hand. "She must die." The note was crumpled as if discarded in haste, and its ink was fresh, suggesting it had been written recently. Poirot's heart quickened. The note echoed the words he had overheard in Jerusalem, but was it the same hand, the same intent? He tucked the note into his pocket, his mind racing. The killer was close, their motive laid bare in those 3 words, but who had written them, and why? The night was silent, save for the distant howl of a jackal. Poirot stood, his eyes scanning the darkened camp. The truth was out there, hidden in the motives that swirled like sand in the desert wind. He would find it, he vowed, before the sun rose again. The hours passed, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of the day. He thought of Carol's trembling hands, Lennox's hollow eyes, Raymond's clenched fists, Ginevra's wild words. Each had a reason to want Mrs. Boynton dead, but which had acted, and what of the others? Lady Westhorn's stiffness, Jefferson Cope's polished charm, Sarah's quiet strength, the syringe, the note, the shadow, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot alone could solve. He sat at a small table in his tent, a map of Petra spread before him. He traced the paths the group had taken that day, marking the camp, the six, the cliffs. Mrs. Boynton had been alone for only a brief window, perhaps an hour. The killer had acted quickly, decisively. The puncture mark suggested a poison, likely digitalis or a similar drug, administered with precision. The syringe pointed to someone with medical knowledge, but the note suggested passion, desperation. Poirot's thoughts turned to the group's dynamics. Mrs. Boynton's control had been absolute, her cruelty a daily ritual. Carol had spoken of silence as punishment, Lennox of lost identity, Raymond of stolen freedom, Ginevra of shadows and devils. Each had been broken in their own way, their motives rooted in years of torment. But motives alone were not enough. Poirot needed evidence, a thread to pull that would unravel the truth. He considered the other travelers. Lady Westhorn's alibi was weak, her sketching a convenient excuse. Jefferson Cope's eagerness to help felt rehearsed, as if hiding something. Sarah King, though an ally, was too close to Raymond to be impartial. Dr. Gerard's insights were valuable, but his own expertise with drugs made him a suspect. Even Nadine, Lennox's wife, had been evasive when questioned, her eyes downcast as she spoke of her plans to leave. Poirot's fingers tapped at the table, a rhythm of thought. The note, "She must die," was the key. Its urgency suggested a plan, but its presence in the sand suggested carelessness. Had the killer meant to discard it, or had it been planted to mislead? Poirot's mind flashed to Ginevra's theatrical outburst. Could she have written it, her shadow a fabrication to deflect suspicion? Or was it Raymond, his passion for Sarah driving him to act? Or perhaps Carol, her quiet hatred finally boiling over? As dawn approached, Poirot stepped outside, the first light painting the cliffs in hues of gold and crimson. He walked to the spot where Mrs. Boynton's body had been found, her chair still standing like a throne of judgment. He knelt, examining the ground, and found a faint impression in the sand, a footprint, small and narrow, partially obscured by the wind. It was not enough to identify the killer, but it was a clue, a whisper of presence. Poirot straightened, his eyes bright with purpose. The motives were clear, the suspects many, but the truth was within reach. He would speak to each again, probe deeper, watch for the telltale signs of guilt. A glance, a hesitation, a lie. The note, the syringe, the footprint, they were pieces of a mosaic, and Poirot would not rest until it was complete. The camp stirred as the others awoke, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Poirot watched them, his mind a crucible of, "I thought the killer was among them." Their motive buried in the sand of Petra's ancient cliffs. He would find them, he vowed, before the day was done. Chapter 7. The alibis unraveled. The sun dipped low over Petra's crimson cliffs, casting long shadows across the camp where Hercule Poirot sat, his small notebook open on his lap. The air was thick with the day's heat, though a faint breeze stirred the dust, carrying with it the murmurs of the travelers huddled in their tents. The death of Mrs. Boynton hung over the group like a storm cloud, and Poirot, with his meticulous mind, was determined to pierce the veil of secret surrounding her demise, the tiny puncture mark on her wrist, the syringe he had pocketed, and the cryptic note "she must die" swirled in his thoughts, each a piece of a puzzle he was assembling with relentless precision. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the camp. The Boynton family sat apart, their faces etched with a mix of grief, relief, and fear. Sarah King, the young medic who had become an unexpected ally, stood near her tent, her brow furrowed as she spoke quietly with Dr. Theodore Gerard. The other travelers, Lady Westholme, Jefferson Cope, and the enigmatic Miss Pierce, moved with the uneasy gait of those who knew suspicion hovered over them. Poirot's task was clear: reconstruct the fatal hour, unravel the alibis, and find the truth hidden in the cracks of their stories. He closed his notebook and rose, brushing the dust from his immaculate suit. "Mademoiselle King," he called, softly, gesturing for Sarah to join him. She approached, her expression a blend of curiosity and determination, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her eyes, "have you found something new?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching slightly. "The alibis, mademoiselle, they are like a house of cards. One small push, and they may collapse. I wish to discuss the timeline of yesterday afternoon, when Madame Boynton met her end." "You were with the group exploring the six weeks?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, I was with Raymond, Carol, and Dr. Gerard. We left the camp around 2 o'clock to see the tombs. Mrs. Boynton stayed behind, as usual, sitting in her chair by the main tent, and the others." Poirot pressed, his gaze piercing. "Lady Westholme, Monsieur Cope, Miss Pierce, and Mademoiselle Ginevra." Sarah hesitated, her memory piecing together the fragmented moments. "Lady Westholme said she was sketching near the cliffs. Jefferson Cope was wandering. I think he mentioned something about photographing the ruins. Miss Pierce was reading, in her tent, or so she claimed. Ginevra, she was with us for a while, but she wandered off before we returned to the camp." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what time did you return to find Madame Boynton dead?" "About 5 o'clock, Sarah said. "The sun was low, and we were tired. Raymond noticed first. She was slumped in her chair, her eyes open but lifeless. I checked her pulse, and that's when I saw the puncture mark." Bon Poirot murmured, tapping his chin. 3 hours, then, between your departure and return. 3 hours in which someone approached Madame Boynton, administered a fatal injection, and vanished into the desert air. Let us begin our inquiries, mademoiselle. The truth, it hides in the details. Their first stop was Lady Westholme's tent, a sturdy canvas structure adorned with maps and sketching supplies. The formidable woman sat inside, her posture rigid, her face set in a scowl as she sorted through her papers. She looked up as Poirot and Sarah entered, her eyes narrowing. "Monsieur Poirot," she said brusquely, "I trust you're not here to waste my time with nonsense. I've already told you I was sketching yesterday afternoon." "Indeed," Madame Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Your sketches, they are of great interest. May I see the work you produced during those hours?" Lady Westholme's lips tightened, but she handed over a sketchbook. Poirot flipped through it, his fingers pausing on a page marked with yesterday's date. The paper was blank, save for a faint pencil outline of Petra's cliffs, barely begun. He raised an eyebrow. "A curious sketch, madame," he said. "So unfinished for 3 hours of work." "I was distracted," Lady Westholme snapped, her cheeks flushing. "The heat, the flies, it was intolerable. I spent much of the time walking, observing the landscape." "Alone?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Of course," she replied, but her eyes flickered, betraying a moment of unease. "I prefer solitude when I work." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, madame, your solitude. It is noted." As they left the tent, Sarah whispered, "That was no sketch." "She wasn't drawing for long, if at all precise," Poirot said. "Her alibi, it is as thin as her pencil lines." "Let us speak with Monsieur Cope next." Jefferson Cope was found near the camp's edge, polishing his camera lens with a cloth. His affable smile greeted them, but Poirot noted the nervous twitch in his hands. "Monsieur Cope," he began, "you were photographing the ruins yesterday." "That's right," Cope said, his voice overly cheerful. "Petra's a marvel, those cliffs, the light. I was all over, snapping shots." "And you saw no one near Madame Boynton's tent?" Poirot asked, his eyes fixed on Cope's face. Cope shook his head quickly. No, I was too far out. I didn't even see her until you all found her." Poirot tilted his head. "Curious, monsieur. The camp is small, and Madame Boynton's chair was in plain view, yet you saw nothing." Cope's smile faltered. I was focused on my camera. You know how it is when you're caught up in something. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone neutral. May I see your photographs? Cope hesitated, then handed over a small stack of prints. Poirot examined them, noting their timestamps. Most were taken far from the camp, but one a blurry shot of the cliff showed a shadow near the main tent, timestamped at 4:30 p.m. Poirot's mustache twitched again. Merci, Monsieur Cope, he said, pocketing the photo. Your camera, it sees more than you claim. As they walked away, Sarah frowned. That shadow, could it be someone near Mrs. Boynton's tent? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps Monsieur Cope wishes us to believe he was elsewhere. His eagerness to help, it is excessive. Their next interview was with Miss Pierce, the nervous spinster whose hands fluttered like startled birds as she spoke. She sat in her tent, a dogged novel in her lap, her eyes darting between Poirot and Sarah. I was reading, she said before Poirot could ask, all afternoon, right here. I didn't see anything, I swear. Calm yourself, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice soothing. What book kept you so engrossed? Miss Pierce held up the novel, a romance with a faded cover. This one, she said. I lose track of time when I read. Poirot glanced at the book, noting its pristine pages. You read with great care, mademoiselle. Not a single page is creased. Miss Pierce blushed. I'm very gentle with books. Or perhaps you did not read at all, Poirot said softly, his eyes narrowing. Perhaps you were elsewhere, Nan. Miss Pierce's hands trembled, but she shook her head vehemently. No, I was here. I didn't see anything, Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle, we shall speak again. As they left, Sarah whispered, she's hiding something. She's too nervous. We, Poirot agreed. Her fear is not of us, but of what she knows. Let us now speak with the Boyntons. The Boynton siblings were gathered in their shared tent, a somber group bound by years of their stepmother's tyranny. Lennox, the eldest, sat with his head in his hands, his wife Nadine watching him with quiet concern. Raymond paced, his jaw tight, while Carol sat rigidly, her eyes red from crying. Ginevra, the youngest, rocked slightly, humming a tune that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Monsieur Lennox, Poirot began, addressing the eldest. Where were you yesterday afternoon? Lennox looked up, his eyes hollow. I was with the group, exploring the Six. I didn't want to go, but Nadine insisted. We were all together, Raymond, Carol, Sarah, Dr. Gerard, and you saw nothing unusual upon your return? Poirot asked. Lennox shook his head. Just her, sitting there. I thought she was asleep at first. Poirot turned to Raymond, whose pacing stopped abruptly. And you, Monsieur Raymond? You were with Mademoiselle King? We. Raymond nodded, his eyes flickering toward Sarah. Yes, we were together. We didn't go near the camp until we all returned. Poirot's gaze lingered on Raymond, noting the nervous glance he cast toward a medical bag in the corner of the tent. And you, Mademoiselle Carol? He asked, turning to the sister. Carol's voice was barely a whisper. I was with the others. I didn't see anything. Ginevra's humming grew louder and Poirot's eyes snapped to her. Mademoiselle Ginevra, he said gently, what did you see? Ginevra's rocking stopped, and her eyes, wide and unfocused, met his shadows. She whispered, shadows, moving in the dust. They danced around her, laughing. Sarah shivered, but Poirot's expression remained calm. And these shadows, mademoiselle, did they have faces? Ginevra's lips parted, but no words came. She resumed her humming, her gaze drifting to the tent's ceiling. Poirot stood, bowing slightly. Merci, mesdames et messieurs, your words, they are most illuminating. As they left the tent, Sarah grabbed Poirot's arm. Ginevra's not right in the head, is she? That talk of shadows, it's nonsense, isn't it? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Nonsense, mademoiselle. Or perhaps a truth wrapped in metaphor. The mind, it speaks in riddles when it fears to speak plainly. The day waned, and Poirot decided to stage a reenactment of the fatal hour, hoping to jolt a reaction from the suspects. He gathered everyone near Mrs. Boynton's chair, now empty, its presence a grim reminder of the crime. The camp was quiet, save for the distant call of a desert bird, and the travelers stood in a tense semicircle, their eyes darting between Poirot and each other. Monsieur and Madame, Poirot began, his voice carrying over the still air. Let us return to yesterday afternoon, between 2 and 5 o'clock. Madame Boynton sat here alone while most of you explored the Sixth. Someone approached her, administered a fatal injection, and left her to die. Let us walk through those moments. He paced slowly, his eyes scanning the group. Mademoiselle King, you and the Boyntons left at 2 o'clock. Lady Westholme, you were sketching all, so you claim. Monsieur Cope, you were photographing. Miss Pierce, you were reading. Yet none of you saw anything. The group remained silent, but Poirot noted Lady Westholme's clenched fists and Cope's forced smile. He continued, let us imagine the killer. They approach, syringe in hand. They are swift, precise. Madame Boynton, perhaps she does not even see them, or perhaps she does, and she smiles, knowing her time has come. He paused, his gaze locking onto Raymond, who flinched. Monsieur Raymond, you were with Mademoiselle King, yet your eyes they strayed to that medical bag. Why? Raymond's face paled. I don't know what you mean. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but commanding. The syringe, monsieur, was not found near the body, yet I found it, hidden in the camp. Someone with medical access to it too, didn't you? You looked at that bag as if it held a secret. Raymond's hands shook, but he said nothing. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. Monsieur Poirot, Raymond was with me. He couldn't have enough, Lady Westholme interrupted, her voice sharp. This is absurd. You're accusing us all, flinging wild theories. Poirot turned to her, his eyes narrowing. Not wild, Madame, precise. Your sketchbook is blank. Your alibi is a lie, and you have a strength of will that could plan such a deed. Lady Westholme's face reddened, but before she could retort, Ginevra let out a piercing scream, collapsing to the ground. The shadows, she cried. They're here. They're watching. The group froze, and Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle. Mademoiselle, who are these shadows? Ginevra's eyes were wild, but she whispered. Her, always her. Even now, she's here. Poirot stood, his mind racing. The reenactment had done its work. Someone had faltered, their hesitation a crack in their facade. As the group dispersed, their faces pale, Poirot turned to Sarah. The truth, mademoiselle. It is close, but we must tread carefully. The killer. They are watching us as closely as we watch them. The chapter closed with the camp settling into an uneasy silence, the stars above Petra cold and unyielding. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the alibis, the syringe, the shadow in Cope's photograph, and Ginevra's cryptic words. The killer was among them, their masks slipping, and Poirot was determined to unmask them before the authorities arrived. Chapter 8. The mask of innocence. The sun hung low over the rose-red cliffs of Petra, casting long shadows across the encampment where Hercule Poirot stood, his small frame silhouetted against the ancient stone. The air was thick with the heat of the day, though a faint breeze carried the scent of dust and dried herbs through the narrow valley. The discovery of Mrs. Boynton's death the previous day had unsettled the travelers, and now, as the afternoon waned, the weight of suspicion pressed heavily on every soul in the camp. Poirot's grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces of those around him, each one a potential actor in this grim drama, each one hiding something beneath a carefully crafted mask. Sarah King approached him, her dark hair tied back, her expression a mix of determination and unease. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low but steady, I've been thinking about the medical supplies. There's something odd. I checked the kit this morning, and a vial of digitoxin is missing. It's a heart medication, but in the wrong dose. It's deadly, do you think? Poirot's mustache twitched as he inclined his head, his mind already turning over the implications. Mademoiselle, your observation is most valuable. A poison, you say. This is a piece of the puzzle that fits well too well. Perhaps we must consider who had access to such a substance and the knowledge to use it. Sarah's brow furrowed. Dr. Gerard, of course, he's a psychiatrist, but he'd know enough about pharmacology. And me, I suppose I'm a doctor. After all, but anyone could have taken it. The medical kit was left unattended during the trek. Poirot nodded, his fingers drumming lightly against his chin. The net widens, but the threads of motive narrowed it again. Tell me, Mademoiselle King, what is your impression of the youngest Boynton? Ginevra, she is theatrical. Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the tent where Ginevra sat, her delicate frame hunched over, her auburn hair falling in disarray. She's fragile, Monsieur Poirot, almost too fragile, I think. She's been broken by her mother's cruelty, but there's something performative about her, like she's playing a role to survive. Precise, Poirot murmured. The mask of innocence is often the most convincing disguise. Come, let us observe her more closely. They approached the tent where was humming softly to herself, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand. Her eyes, large and luminous, flicked up as Poirot and Sarah drew near. Oh, it's you, she said, her voice a breathy whisper. The detective and the doctor, are you here to accuse me? To say I killed her? Her lips trembled, but her eyes held a strange intensity, as if daring them to probe deeper. Poirot's smile was gentle, disarming. Mademoiselle Ginevra, accuse no one yet, but I am curious. You were near the camp when your stepmother died, were you not? Did you see anything unusual, a shadow, perhaps, moving in the heat? Ginevra's hand stilled, and for a moment her face was a blank canvas devoid of emotion. Then, with a suddenness that startled Sarah, she leaped to her feet, her voice rising to a fevered pitch. A shadow. Yes, I saw it. It moved like a ghost, slipping between the rocks. It was there, watching her, waiting for her to die. She clutched at her shawl, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else, something Poirot could not yet name. Sarah placed a calming hand on Ginevra's arm. Ginevra, it's all right. Try to remember exactly what you saw. Was it a person? Could you see their face? But Ginevra shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was no person. It was darkness, a shadow of guilt, maybe, hers, mine, all of ours. She sank back to the ground, her energy spent, leaving Poirot and Sarah exchanging glances. She speaks in riddles, Sarah said quietly as they stepped away. But I don't think she's lying, not entirely. Could she have seen someone, or something? Poirot replied, his tone thoughtful. The mind, mademoiselle, can conjure shadows where none exist, but it can also cloak truth in metaphor. We must unravel this shadow of hers. As they walked back toward the center of the camp, Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of connections. The missing vial of digitoxin, Ginevra's cryptic outburst, the syringe he had found the previous day, all pointed to a deliberate act, a murder planned with precision. But who among this disparate group had the motive, the means, and the opportunity? The Boynton siblings, crushed under their stepmother's tyranny. Each had reason to wish her dead. Dr. Gerard, with his knowledge of the mind and its poisons, could not be dismissed. And then there was Lady Westholme, whose aloof demeanor and vague alibi sketching alone during the fatal hour felt increasingly suspect. Poirot paused by the communal dining area, where Jefferson Cope was attempting to lighten the mood with a story about his travels in Egypt. The American's charm was effortless, but Poirot noted the way his eyes darted toward the Boyntons, particularly Carol, whose quiet beauty seemed to draw his attention. "Monsieur Cope," Poirot called, approaching with a genial smile. "A word, if you please. You were with the group during the trek, but did you, perhaps, return to the camp at any point?" Cope's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Me, no, I was with the others the whole time. Why do you ask?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with a knowing glint. "Oh, merely to clarify. The desert plays tricks on the memory, does it not? One might think one was sketching, or walking, or watching." Cope laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You're a sharp one, Monsieur Poirot, but I assure you, I was nowhere near Mrs. Boynton when she passed," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he was far from convinced. He excused himself and moved toward Dr. Gerard, who was sitting alone, scribbling notes in a small leather-bound journal. The psychiatrist looked up, his face lined with fatigue. "Monsieur Poirot," Gerard said, closing his journal, "I've been expecting you. You want to know about the digitoxin, don't you?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You are perceptive, doctor. Mademoiselle King has informed me of the missing vial. You, with your medical expertise, would know its uses and its dangers." Gerard nodded gravely. "Digitoxin is a cardiac glycoside. In small doses, it strengthens the heart. In larger ones, it stops it. Mrs. Boynton's death, her symptoms, the puncture mark suggest an overdose, but I swear to you, I did not touch that vial." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning closer, "you study the mind. Doctor, you have seen the damage Mrs. Boynton inflicted on her family. Did you not think, perhaps, that her death would be a liberation?" Gerard's eyes darkened. "I won't deny she was a monster. Her control was pathological, a form of sadistic narcissism, but I am no murderer. My work is to heal, not to harm." Poirot studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Merci, doctor. Your candor is noted." As the day wore on, Poirot continued his inquiries, piecing together the fragmented accounts of the travelers. Raymond Boynton, usually so reserved, seemed particularly agitated when questioned about his whereabouts. "I was with Sarah," he insisted, his voice tight. "We were exploring the 6th. I didn't go near Mother." But Poirot's keen senses caught the slight tremor in Raymond's hand, the way his gaze flickered toward the medical tent. "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you know something of medicine, do you not? Your brother Lennox mentioned you studied chemistry before your mother redirected your ambitions." Raymond's face paled. "That was years ago." I wouldn't." Poirot raised a hand, his expression kind but firm. "Peace, monsieur. I seek only the truth." By evening the camp was alive with whispers. The travelers gathered for dinner, their conversations stilted, their glances wary. Lady Westholme sat apart, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Poirot watched her closely, noting the way her fingers gripped her fork, as if anchoring herself against the tide of suspicion. Sarah joined him again, her face drawn. "I've been thinking about Ginevra's shadow," she said. "What if it wasn't a person, but a feeling? Guilt, like she said. Maybe she knows something, maybe she saw the killer." Or Poirot said, his voice low, "She is the killer, and her shadow is the weight of her own act. But we must not leap to conclusions. The truth, mademoiselle, is like the desert. It reveals itself only when the sand shifts." The meal was interrupted by a sudden cry from Ginevra's tent. Poirot and Sarah rushed over, finding the young woman standing in the doorway, her face ashen. "It's gone," she gasped. "My locket, it had her picture in it. Mother's picture. Someone took it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "When did you last see it, mademoiselle?" "This morning," Ginevra said, her voice trembling. "I kept it under my pillow. It's all I had of her. Even if I hated her." Sarah knelt beside her, offering comfort, while Poirot stepped into the tent. His sharp eyes scanned the space, landing on a small scrap of fabric caught on a tent peg, a piece of fine linen, embroidered with the initials LW. He pocketed it without a word, his mind racing. As night fell, Poirot sat alone by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across his face. The clues were mounting: the missing vial, the syringe, Ginevra's shadow, the scrap of fabric. Each pointed to a different suspect, yet none formed a complete picture. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work, sifting through the motives and alibis. Lady Westholme's blank sketch nagged at him. Why claim to be sketching if there was no evidence? and Jefferson Cope's eagerness to please too eager perhaps. Dr. Gerard's knowledge of poisons was undeniable, but his demeanor suggested a man burdened by conscience, not guilt. The Boyntons, meanwhile, were a tangle of suppressed rage and fear, each one a potential killer, yet each one trapped by their own weakness. And then there was Ginevra. Her outburst about the shadow felt both genuine and calculated, as if she were testing the waters, gauging how much Poirot knew. Her missing locket, too, was curious. Was it a ploy to deflect suspicion, or had someone taken it to plant evidence elsewhere? Poirot rose, his decision made. He would need to test the suspects, to push them until the mask of innocence slipped. He called for Sarah, who appeared at once, her eyes bright with determination. "Mademoiselle, I have a plan. Tomorrow we will stage a small experiment. I will gather the suspects and confront them with the clues we have. One of them will betray themselves, I am certain of it." Sarah nodded, though her expression was wary. What kind of experiment? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A reenactment, of sorts. We will recreate the moment of Mrs. Boynton's death, and we will watch their faces. The guilty one will not be able to hide their fear." As the fire died to embers, Poirot felt a surge of certainty. The truth was close, hidden just beneath the surface, like the ancient city carved into Petra's cliffs. He would find it, as he always did, by peeling away the layers of deception until only the raw, unvarnished truth remained. The night stretched on, the desert silent but for the occasional cry of a jackal. Poirot lay awake, his mind a map of possibilities, each path leading to a different suspect, a different motive. The missing vial of digitoxin pointed to medical knowledge, but who among them had the nerve to use it? The syringe suggested precision, but whose hand had wielded it? And the shadow, what was it, if not a metaphor for the darkness that lurked in one of their hearts? He thought of Sarah, her sharp mind and steady courage. She was a valuable ally, but even she was not above suspicion. Her access to the medical supplies, her growing attachment to Raymond, could it be that she, too, had a motive? Poirot shook his head, dismissing the thought for now. Sarah's honesty was her strength, and he trusted her instincts, if not yet her heart. The Boyntons, too, occupied his thoughts. Lennox, with his quiet resentment, Carol, with her fierce loyalty, Raymond, torn between love and hate, and Ginevra, the fragile enigma. Each had suffered under Mrs. Boynton's tyranny, but which had snapped. And then there was Lady Westholme, whose cold demeanor hid a past Poirot had yet to uncover. Her initials on the scrap of fabric were damning, but not conclusive. As dawn broke over Petra, Poirot rose. His resolve hardened. The day would bring answers. He was sure of it. He dressed carefully, his neat suit a stark contrast to the rugged landscape, and stepped out into the camp. The travelers were already stirring, their faces drawn with the strain of the past 2 days. Poirot greeted them with a cheerful bon matin that belied the gravity of his mission. Sarah joined him as he outlined his plan. "We'll gather everyone near Mrs. Boynton's chair," he said. "I will walk them through the hour of her death, step by step. You will watch their reactions, mademoiselle. Look for the smallest sign of flinch, a glance, a tightening of the jaw. The guilty one will reveal themselves." Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll do my best, Monsieur Poirot. But what if they're all innocent? What if it was an accident?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "An accident, mademoiselle? Non. The puncture mark, the missing vial, these are not the work of chance. Someone planned this, and they planned it well. But they did not account for Hercule Poirot." The reenactment began at noon, with the sun blazing overhead. Poirot stood before the group, his voice clear and commanding. "Madame et monsieur, we are here to retrace the final moments of Mrs. Boynton's life. Picture it. She sits there, in her chair, watching the desert. The camp is quiet, the others are away. Someone approaches. Someone with a syringe, with poison, with intent." He paced slowly, his eyes moving from face to face. Lady Westholme stood stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jefferson Cope fidgeted, his smile strained. Dr. Gerard's gaze was steady, but his hands were clasped tightly. The Boyntons stood together, a unit of shared suffering, though Raymond's eyes darted nervously toward Sarah. Poirot continued, his voice rising. "This person knows her habits. They know she will not move, will not cry out. They inject the poison a tiny prick, unnoticed until it is too late. And then, they slip away, leaving her to die alone." A gasp broke the silence. Ginevra, her face pale, clutched at Carol's arm. "Stop it," she cried. "You're making it sound so real." "It is real, Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "And one of you knows exactly how real." It turned to Lady Westholme, holding up the scrap of fabric. "This was found in Mademoiselle Ginevra's tent. It bears your initials. Madame, can you explain?" Lady Westholme's face flushed, but her voice was steady. "I have no idea how it got there. Someone must have taken it from my things." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "Or perhaps you were there, near the tent, near the body." The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Jefferson Cope stepped forward, his voice trembling. "This is absurd. You're accusing everyone, Monsieur Poirot. What about the medical bag? Anyone could have taken that vial." "Indeed," Poirot said, turning to him. "And you, Monsieur Cope, were so eager to help." perhaps too eager. Did you hope to deflect suspicion by being so cooperative? Cope's mouth opened, but no words came. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Gerard. And you, Doctor, with your knowledge of poisons, did you see an opportunity to end a tyrant's reign? Gerard shook his head, his voice calm. I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I am innocent. Poirot's eyes moved to the Boyntons, lingering on Raymond. And you, Monsieur Raymond, you loved Mademoiselle King, but your mother stood in the way. Did you act to free yourself? Raymond's face twisted with anguish. I hated her, yes, but I didn't kill her. I couldn't. The reenactment ended in a tense silence, each suspect retreating to their thoughts. Poirot turned to Sarah, his voice low. Did you see it, mademoiselle, the moment of truth? Sarah nodded slowly. Lady Westholme, she didn't flinch, but her eyes, they were too steady, like she was forcing herself to stay calm. And Ginevra, she was watching Lady Westholme the whole time. Poirot's smile was faint but satisfied. Bean, we are close, mademoiselle, very close. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered by Mrs. Boynton's chair, his fingers tracing the armrest where she had sat. The shadow Ginevra had spoken of was no longer a mystery. It was the shadow of guilt, cast by the one who had planned and executed the perfect crime. But the name, the final piece, eluded him still. He would need one more push, one more revelation, to bring the truth into the light. The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone, the desert wind whispering secrets only he could hear. The mask of innocence was slipping, and soon the killer would be unmasked. Chapter 9. The Desert's Secret. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rose-red cliffs of Petra, their jagged edges softened by the twilight's embrace. The air, heavy with the day's heat, carried a faint chill as night crept over the ancient city. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the camp, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, his mind a whirl of fragments, clues, alibis, and whispered motives that danced like the desert wind. Time was slipping away. The authorities would arrive by midday tomorrow, and with them, the chance to unravel the truth would vanish into the bureaucratic haze of official reports. Poirot's mustache twitched as he surveyed the scattered tents, each housing a suspect, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of Mrs. Boynton's murder. The camp was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of canvas or the distant bleat of a goat echoing through the six. The travelers, weary from the day's trek and the weight of suspicion, had retreated to their tents, but Poirot knew sleep would elude them. Fear and guilt were poor bedfellows. He adjusted his hat, its brim casting a shadow over his piercing eyes, and began his evening's work. The desert, with its vast silence and ancient secrets, seemed to watch him, as if daring him to uncover the truth hidden in its folds. Poirot's first stop was the tent of Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist whose insights into Mrs. Boynton's sadistic nature had sharpened Poirot's understanding of the family's torment. The doctor was seated at a small folding table, his lantern casting a warm glow over a notebook filled with meticulous handwriting. He looked up as Poirot entered, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes alert. Monsieur Poirot, Gerard said, setting down his pen. You look like a man who sees ghosts in the shadows. Not ghosts, Dr. Poirot replied, his voice smooth but firm. Truths, they are more elusive, but far more dangerous when cornered. Gerard raised an eyebrow, gesturing to a canvas chair. Sit, then. Let us corner these truths together. Poirot declined the seat, preferring to stand, his hands clasped behind his back. You spoke of Mrs. Boynton's control, her pleasure in domination. But tell me, doctor, in your observations, did you ever see her fear? A moment when her power faltered. Gerard leaned back, his finger steepled. Fear? No, she was a fortress, that woman, but he hesitated, his gaze drifting to the lantern's flame. There was a moment, perhaps 2 days ago, when we spoke to Lady Westholme. I was nearby, adjusting my pack. Mrs. Boynton's voice, it was not her usual venom, it was guarded, as if she sensed a threat. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Lady Westholme, she is a woman of steel, is she not? Yet steel can hide cracks. Tell me, what did they say? Gerard shook his head. I caught only fragments, something about a past debt and justice long overdue. Lady Westholme's tone was cold, precise. I thought little of it then too. Strong wills clashing, nothing more. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. And you, doctor, where were you when Mrs. Boynton met her end? Gerard's expression tightened. I was with the group, exploring the high tombs. I returned with the others and found her as you saw, dead, with that mark on her wrist. Poirot studied the doctor's face, searching for a flicker of deceit, but found only the wariness of a man burdened by knowledge. Mercy, doctor, your candor is appreciated. But the desert, it seems, keeps many secrets. I intend to find them. As Poirot stepped back into the night, the stars above Petra burned with a clarity that seemed to mock the murkiness of human motives. Lady Westholme. Her name had surfaced too often. Her blank sketch, her evasive answers, her confrontation with Mrs. Boynton. Poirot's mind turned to her past, a detail Dr. Gerard had unknowingly illuminated. A past debt. Justice long overdue. Could it be that Mrs. Boynton's cruelty stretched beyond her family, into a history that had caught up with her under Petra's cliffs? He made his way to Lady Westholme's tent, the canvas taut against the desert wind. Inside, she sat ramrod straight, her travel journal open before her, though her pen had not touched the page. Her severe features, framed by a practical hat, turned toward Poirot with barely concealed irritation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped. "This is hardly the hour for social calls. Nor is it a night for pretense." Lady Westholme, Poirot replied, his tone polite but unyielding. "I am here to discuss a matter of life and death. Specifically, the death of Mrs. Boynton." Her eyes narrowed, but she gestured to a stool. "Very well, speak." Poirot remained standing, his presence filling the small space. "You were seen speaking with Mrs. Boynton 2 days ago. A conversation, I am told, that was not entirely cordial. Words of past debts and justice were overheard. Care to enlighten me?" Lady Westholme's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the journal, eavesdropping. "Monsieur Poirot, hardly the behavior of a gentleman. A detective, madam, is no gentleman when murder is afoot. What was this debt? What justice did you seek?" She exhaled sharply, her composure fraying. "Mrs. Boynton was a vile woman. I knew of her reputation, her time as a prison warden in America, her cruelty to those under her charge. It was no secret among certain circles. I merely reminded her that such actions leave scars, and scars have a way of demanding reckoning." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "And did you, perhaps, decide to be the hand of that reckoning?" Her face flushed, but her voice remained steady. "You accuse me of murder? Preposterous. I was sketching when she died. As I told you, my paper may be blank, but that proves nothing. The desert inspires in its own time." "Indeed," Poirot said softly, "but the desert also reveals. A blank page, madame, is not an alibi. It is a canvas for suspicion." He left her tent, her indignant protests fading into the night. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. The syringe, the poison, the cryptic note, "She must die," each pointed to a calculated act, but the hand behind it was still a shadow. Poirot's thoughts turned to the Boynton siblings, each a victim of their stepmother's tyranny, each with a motive carved deep by years of suffering. He sought out Raymond Boynton next, finding him pacing near the camp's edge, his face pale under the starlight. Sarah King lingered nearby, her presence a quiet anchor for the young man's turmoil. Poirot approached, his steps deliberate, his voice gentle but probing. "Monsieur Raymond," he began, "you have suffered much under your stepmother's rule. Tell me, did you ever dream of freedom, a freedom that perhaps required a desperate act?" Raymond froze, his eyes darting to Sarah, then back to Poirot. I hated her," he admitted, his voice low. "We all did, but kill her, I couldn't. I wanted to, God knows I did. But," he trailed off, his hands trembling. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. "He's telling the truth, Monsieur Poirot. Raymond was with me when we found her. He couldn't have done it." Poirot nodded, but his gaze lingered on Raymond's medical bag half open on the ground. "And the syringe, monsieur? The one I found near the camp. It is not yours." Raymond's face strained of color. I don't know. I had one, for emergencies, but I never used it. If it's missing, someone could have taken it." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Someone or perhaps it was never yours to begin with." The night deepened, and Poirot moved through the camp like a spectre, piecing together fragments of truth. Carol Boynton, her eyes red from crying, admitted to wishing her stepmother dead but swore she lacked the courage to act. Ginevra, the youngest, spoke in riddles, her theatrical gestures masking a fear that Poirot sensed was not entirely feigned. Jefferson Cope, ever the eager helper, offered alibis to polished, to be trusted. And then there was the vial of poison, missing from the camp's medical supplies, a detail Sarah King had confirmed with a grim nod. As midnight approached, Poirot gathered the suspects under the starlit cliffs, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of lanterns. The ancient stones of Petra loomed around them, silent witnesses to a drama as old as betrayal itself. He stood at the center, his small frame commanding the attention of all. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying the weight of certainty, "we stand in the shadow of a crime, a murder most deliberate. Mrs. Boynton was not merely a tyrant to her family. She was a woman whose past held secrets that reached across oceans and years to find her here, in Petra." He paced slowly, his eyes scanning each face. "The syringe, the poison, the note, she must die. These are not the tools of impulse but of calculation. And yet, the killer's hand was not driven by hatred alone. There was purpose, a reckoning for a past wrong." He turned to Lady Westholme, whose rigid posture betrayed a flicker of unease. "Madame, you spoke of justice, of debts unpaid. I have learned, through discreet inquiries, that Mrs. Boynton's tenure as a prison warden left many victims. One, a young woman, suffered greatly under her cruelty. That woman was your sister, was she not?" A gasp rippled through the group. Lady Westholme's face went ashen, but she said nothing. Poirot continued, relentless. "You came to Petra not for adventure, but for vengeance. You knew of Mrs. Boynton's travels. planned your meeting with precision. The syringe, taken from the camp's supplies, was your weapon. The poison, carefully administered, was your justice. And the blank sketch, a lie to cover your movements. Lady Westholme rose, her voice shaking with fury. This is outrageous. You have no proof. Poirot held up a hand. Proof, madame. The desert has spoken. The vial of poison found hidden in your tent this very hour bears your fingerprints. The note, written in your hand, confirms your intent, and your sister's name, whispered by Mrs. Boynton in fear 2 days ago, seals your motive. The silence was deafening. Lady Westholme's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. She destroyed her, she whispered, my sister. Broken, because of that woman. Poirot's voice softened, but only slightly. Justice, madame, is not yours to dispense. Murder is not redemption. He turned to the others, his gaze steady. The method is clear poison, delivered by syringe, a tiny puncture mark. The motive, a vendetta rooted in pain, but the name. He paused, letting the tension build. I know the method, Ms. Amos, but the name I shall confirm with one final piece of evidence, to be sought at dawn. The group dispersed, shaken, their whispers trailing into the night. Poirot stood alone, the stars above reflecting in his eyes. The desert had yielded its secret, but one truth remained, a final thread to tie the knot of justice. Dawn would bring the answer, and with it, the end of the mystery. Chapter 10. Poirot's verdict. The ancient amphitheater of Petra stretched before Hercule Poirot, its weathered stone seats carved into the rose-red cliffs, bathed in the soft glow of a desert moon. The air was heavy with anticipation, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of wind through the narrow six. The suspects, a motley assembly of travelers and the beleaguered Boynton family, sat in a semicircle, their faces taut with expectation. Poirot stood at the center, his small, fastidious figure commanding the vast space, his mustache impeccably trimmed, his eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who had unraveled the threads of a tangled mystery. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, carrying across the ancient stones. We are gathered here tonight to resolve a matter most grave, the murder of Mrs. Boynton, a woman whose life, and indeed whose death, has cast a shadow over us all. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, will reveal the truth. The group shifted uneasily. Sarah King, her dark eyes alert, sat beside Raymond Boynton, whose hands fidgeted nervously. Carol Boynton clutched her sister Ginevra's arm, the latter's pale face half hidden by a cascade of auburn hair. Lennox Boynton, his expression weary but resolute, stared at the ground. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, leaned forward, his analytical mind clearly intrigued. Jefferson Cope, the affable American, adjusted his glasses, while Lady Westholme, her posture rigid, fixed Poirot with a defiant glare. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly on the stone. Let us begin with the facts, he said. Mrs. Boynton was found dead yesterday afternoon, seated in her chair at the camp, a small puncture mark on her wrist. The cause of death, as confirmed by Mademoiselle King's medical expertise, was a lethal dose of a poison, likely digitoxin, administered through injection. The question is, who among you had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit this act? He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Mrs. Boynton was no ordinary woman. She was a tyrant, a manipulator, a sadist who thrived on the suffering of those around her. Her stepchildren Lennox, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra lived under her oppressive control, their spirits crushed, their lives dictated by her whims. Each of you, in your own way, had reason to wish her gone. Raymond's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Monsieur Boynton, we will explore all possibilities. But first, let us consider the broader picture. Mrs. Boynton's past, you see, holds the key to her demise. Poirot turned to the group, his gaze sweeping over them. Before she was Mrs. Boynton, she was a prison warden, notorious for her cruelty. She ruled her charges with an iron fist, leaving a trail of broken lives. This history, Ms. Amos, is not without consequence. It suggests that the motive for her murder may extend beyond her family, to someone whose life was touched by her past. Lady Westholme's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a moment before continuing. Let us reconstruct the fatal hour. Mrs. Boynton was last seen alive at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, seated at the camp while the rest of you explored Petra's wonders. By 4 o'clock, she was dead. The window of opportunity is narrow, and yet every one of you claims an alibi. He turned to Lennox. Monsieur Lennox Boynton, you stated you were walking with your wife Nadine near the high place of sacrifice, yet Nadine mentioned you stepped away briefly to fetch water. A small gap perhaps, but enough for a determined man to act. Lennox's jaw clenched. I loved my wife, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason to harm my stepmother, no matter how cruel she was. Poirot nodded, unperturbed. And you, Mademoiselle Carol, claimed to be sketching the cliffs with Mademoiselle Ginevra, but Ginevra in her theatrical way spoke of a shadow near the camp. A shadow, perhaps, that was you, slipping away to confront your stepmother. Carol's eyes widened. That's absurd. I hated her. Yes, but I didn't kill her. Ginevra let out a soft, dramatic sob, drawing all eyes. The shadow, she whispered. It moved like a ghost. I saw it, I swear. Poirot's lips twitched, almost a smile. Mademoiselle Ginevra, your imagination is vivid, but we shall return to your shadow. For now, let us consider Monsieur Raymond Boynton. He turned to Raymond, whose face paled. You were seen speaking with Mademoiselle King near the sick, but you admitted to wandering alone for a time. Your hatred for your stepmother was no secret, and your conversation with Mademoiselle King revealed a desperate wish to be free. Sarah gripped Raymond's hand, her voice steady. Raymond couldn't have done it, Monsieur Poirot. He was with me most of the time. Most, Poirot repeated softly. A dangerous word in a murder investigation. He pivoted to Dr. Gerard. You, doctor, are a man of science, with access to medical supplies. A syringe was found at the camp, and a vial of poison went missing. Your expertise in psychology and perhaps pharmacology makes you a candidate. Gerard raised an eyebrow. I study the mind, Monsieur Poirot, not the art of poisoning. Besides, I was examining rock formations with Monsieur Cope. Jefferson Cope nodded eagerly. That's right. We were together the whole time. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, Monsieur Cope, your eagerness to provide alibis for others is curious. Your affection for Mademoiselle Carroll is evident. Perhaps you sought to protect her, or even to act on her behalf. Cope blinked, flustered. I only wanted to help. I had no reason to harm Mrs. Boynton. Finally Poirot turned to Lady Westholme. And you, madame, claim to be sketching the cliffs alone, yet your sketchbook, when examined, was blank. A curious oversight for a woman of your precision. Lady Westholme's voice was icy. I was distracted. The landscape was overwhelming. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing again. Let us turn to the clues. The syringe, found near the camp, suggests medical knowledge. The missing vial of poison points to premeditation. The cryptic note in Mrs. Boynton's tent, she must die, indicates intent. And then, there is the puncture mark. So small, so precise, delivered with a steady hand. He stopped, facing the group. The killer Amos, is among you. But to find them, we must look beyond the obvious. The Boynton children, oppressed though they were, lacked the precision for this act. Their motives were emotional, raw, but their actions were not calculated. No, the killer is someone with a colder, more deliberate mind. Sarah leaned forward. Monsieur Poirot, you said the poison was digitoxin. It's not easy to obtain. Whoever did this had to have planned it carefully. Precisement, Poirot said, nodding. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. Mrs. Boynton's past as a warden was not merely a footnote. One of her victims, a woman imprisoned unjustly, suffered greatly under her cruelty. That woman's family swore revenge, and one member of that family is here. Tonight, a murmur rippled through the group. Lady Westholme's face remained impassive, but her hands gripped her shawl tightly. Poirot continued, his voice rising. Lady Westholme, you are not what you seem. Your title, your travels, your air of authority, these are a mask. You were born Eleanor Carlyle, sister to a woman who died in Mrs. Boynton's prison, broken by her cruelty. You tracked Mrs. Boynton to Petra, armed with knowledge of poisons from your late husband's medical practice. You staged your alibi, claiming to sketch, but you slipped back to the camp, injected the poison, and returned unnoticed. Lady Westholme rose, her face pale but composed. This is preposterous. You have no proof. Poirot held up a hand. The proof, madame, is in the details. The syringe bore traces of your perfume, a distinctive scent I noticed when we first met. The blank sketchbook betrays your absence from the cliffs. And the note, she must die, was written in your hand, a fragment of a letter you thought you had destroyed. He produced a small crumpled paper from his pocket, holding it aloft. This, found in the ashes of your tent's fire, matches the ink and script of your travel journal. Lady Westholme's composure cracked, her eyes blazing. She was a monster, she spat. She destroyed my sister, my family. She deserved to die. The group gasped. Carol clutched Ginevra, who buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Raymond and Sarah exchanged a glance, relief mingling with shock. Poirot's voice softened. Vengeance, madame, is not justice. You took a life, and now you must answer for it. Lady Westholme sank back into a seat, her defiance crumbling. I only wanted to end her reign of terror. Poirot turned to the others. The Boyntons, you are free now. Free to live, to love, to find your own paths. Mademoiselle King and Monsieur Raymond, I see a future bright with promise. Monsieur Lennox, Mademoiselle Carroll, Mademoiselle Ginevra, your chains are broken. He paused, addressing the group. Justice is served, not by vengeance, but by truth. I, Hercule Poirot, have spoken. As the authorities arrived to take Lady Westholme away, the desert night seemed to exhale. Sarah and Raymond stood hand in hand, gazing at the stars. The Boyntons, though shaken, shared tentative smiles, their burdens lifted. Poirot, adjusting his hat, walked toward the sick, his work complete. The amphitheater fell silent, the echoes of truth lingering in the ancient stones. The mystery of Mrs. Boynton's death was solved, and Petra, the city of secrets, held one less shadow.